I didn't want to go on our family vacation because my sister always makes me babysit late at night. Every time we go out, I'm stuck looking after my 3 nephews. It got so bad that I had to move out of my parents' house. Last summer, we went to the beach for vacation. My parents paid for my hotel room, but I had to share it with my rowdy nephews because my sister and her husband wanted their own room. They said I'd have time for myself, but I ended up babysitting again. I complained to everyone about how I felt, but they reminded me that I was getting a free trip. We mostly did only one thing I wanted to do, which was visit an art gallery. I love doing this when I'm at the beach, but the kids don't like it. This year, my parents planned another beach trip for June, assuming I'd go along like last year. But I refused. I said I'd drive myself and pay for my own hotel room so I could have my own space. My parents were surprised and tried to remind me of the cost, but I told them not to worry. I have a good job and a reliable car, so I can afford it. That's when the argument started. I explained my reasons for wanting to do things differently this time. I want to enjoy this vacation as an adult and not feel like a child like last year. My parents told my sister about my plans, and she called me angrily. She said I'd ruin the vacation if I didn't help with her kids. I got upset and yelled back, telling her how she always made me babysit last year. I didn't get to do what I wanted, like going to an art gallery. I'm a grown man, and I deserve to enjoy my vacation too. Now my sister isn't talking to me, and my parents want me to ride with them to avoid conflict. I'm still saying no, but it's hard with all the pressure. Am I wrong for sticking to my decision? I know it'll be tough for my sister to handle her kids without anyone's help. Update: it's only been an hour since I posted, but my sister saw it on Reddit. She's really mad at me and upset that people in the comments aren't taking her side. She went on a big rant about how hard it is to raise triplets and how I should help because I'm young, single, and she needs a break. I didn't change my mind, so now she's calling our parents to get them involved. I'm waiting for their call. Update: I finished work, so I can tell you more about what happened. It's all done now. My sister got her parents involved. They saw my post and were shocked by all the comments. They're mad that I posted here, but I told them if they listened to me in the first place, I wouldn't have needed to. I'm tired of always having to keep the peace at my expense. They got mad at my sister instead. Long story short, the vacation is canceled. The hotel wasn't booked yet, but my parents are arguing with my sister. She's blaming me, and my nephews are upset they're not going to the beach. My sister called me at lunch and hinted that I don't have a life, so I should help. I recorded it and told our parents, and that's what they're arguing about now. Small update. I wasn't going to update again, but here's a little more. Parents said that they won't ever push babysitting of my nephews on me again and have agreed that what happened last year was unfair to me. Right now, they're very angry with my sister for telling me I should help her because she thinks I have no life. My sister is playing the victim, and my brother-in-law is basically saying nope to the whole mess and spending most of his time at work. Thank you to everyone who has commented. You made my day. Update 1. My parents said sorry, but my sister didn't, at least not at first. A week ago, I made this new account to ask if I was wrong. Turns out I wasn't. There's so much to tell that I couldn't fit into the original post, so a friend suggested I come here. When I asked if I was wrong, it caused a lot of trouble in my family. Basically, my parents and older sister got used to me helping with my young triplet nephews. I stayed home until I was 22 to save money while going to college. A scholarship helped a lot, and living at home kept me from getting too much debt because I worked part-time. I'm really grateful for that. But after college, everyone acted like I had all the time in the world and dragged me on a family vacation. During that vacation, I had to babysit my 3 6-year-old nephews. I even had to share a hotel room with them, and let me tell you, those kids didn't listen to anything I said. On the first night of the trip, I had to call their mom twice because the kids were misbehaving. But I got blamed for wanting to do other things during the vacation. It seemed like if the whole family didn't like something, it didn't happen, which was unfair because I'm part of the family and didn't get a say. I told my parents about this after my last post, and they admitted they were wrong. After that terrible vacation last year, I decided to move out before the summer ended, which surprised everyone because I didn't warn them. I got a great job right after college thanks to an internship and moved to cut my commute from 45 minutes to 15. My sister was mad because she wouldn't get free babysitting on weekends anymore, but she still tried to make me do it. Sometimes I gave in, especially if there was pizza involved, and it became a habit. But last month, my parents said we're going on another family vacation to the same place, and they wanted it to go the same way as last time. I quickly realized it was a setup. If I let my parents book the hotel rooms and rode with them, I'd end up in the same mess as last time. So I calmly said I'd drive myself and pay for my own stuff. That's when everything blew up. My parents begged me, and my sister tried to pressure me by making me doubt myself. But I didn't give in. After standing up to my sister, I posted on Am I the Jerk? Because of all the pressure. My sister found the post in less than an hour, and things got messy. At first, my family was against me. My sister called our parents, who then called me in the morning. They were on the phone with me while reading my post. They tried to say it was exaggerated, but I pointed out details that showed it was true. Then I told them to check the comments. There were too many for them to read, so I kept updating them. I told them I was tired of always having to make peace by giving in to my sister. Then I told them I had to go, and we'd talk more later. My parents were shocked to see hundreds, maybe thousands of comments in just a few hours. Later, I updated them that the numbers had doubled and were still growing, which made them even more shocked. So they had to really think about what they'd done. My sister kept trying to call me while I was at work, but my phone was silent until lunchtime, so she could only leave messages and texts. She finally got through to me during lunch. She was upset because my post made our parents mad at her. They argued, and my parents ended up canceling the whole vacation. They later admitted they were embarrassed and blamed each other. They said they were wrong to always make me babysit for free when I wasn't even living at home anymore. They tried to say they didn't charge me rent during college, but I reminded them that kids don't ask to be born, and I was trying my best to make my own way. Then I reminded my parents that my dad got the same help from his parents when he was in college. That ended the argument. When my sister called me at lunch, I told her the facts, and she didn't react well. She basically said I don't have a life and should spend my weekends helping her because she's tired and can't go out without her kids unless someone watches them. But she's a stay-at-home mom with a husband who makes good money, and they own their house. My nephews aren't really my responsibility. They just assumed they were. My sister hung up angrily, but I recorded the call and played it for my parents later. They were mad and fought with my sister. She blamed me and insisted my life should revolve around hers. I told her that was selfish. It took days, but her husband made her apologize to me. She seemed really sorry, which was unusual for her. It came out that one reason I was always asked to babysit was because my sister didn't trust strangers. It wasn't really about the money, but maybe it was. My brother-in-law thought my sister paid me for babysitting. But after I moved out, she didn't even give me gas money. She just gave me cash, enough for pizza for me and the kids, and kept the rest. She'd been shortchanging me for months. He got mad when he found out during her weak apology. She had to pay me back from her own savings, which she didn't like. Then he apologized for not standing up for me and promised to hire a babysitter from now on. It'll cost them, but my sister will get her date nights back. We had a family meeting where we all talked things out. There were apologies all around. Then my parents said we're still having the family vacation. I'm still driving myself and paying for my own hotel. If my sister tries to make me babysit again, I'll stay in a different hotel. She promised she won't do that. If I don't update after the vacation in a month, everything's fine. Update 2. My sister called me, demanding I delete my posts. She's even more upset now that she knows how many people saw them. It's not great having a family that knows about your Reddit account. Yesterday, she called me after work to ask if comments were still coming in. She said she couldn't handle reading them herself because they were all mean to her. So I told her the truth. About 10 comments still come in every day, and they mostly say the same things about her. She started crying and begged me to delete my posts. But I said no. I told her she can cry to anyone she wants, but the posts stay up because they're my way of making sure she doesn't treat me badly again. She basically thought my life should revolve around hers, didn't pay me for babysitting, and made me babysit all the time during last year's family vacation. So I didn't have any fun. It's no surprise people hate her for treating me like that. When I mentioned that the posts had spread to other websites and some articles and videos were made about it, she screamed and hung up. Then my parents called, begging me to delete the post. I said no because they didn't stand up for me. If they'd told my sister to treat me like an equal instead of a servant, none of this would have happened. I'm not her servant or babysitter. I'm her brother, and I'm grown up. Wouldn't they be tired of this if they were in my shoes? They agreed but still begged me to delete the post. I said no and told them I'll keep posting if they don't stand up for me more when my sister complains. Let her solve her own problems because enabling her caused this mess. I didn't have those kids. I have my own life, a new career, and I want to ask someone out soon. I'm moving forward, and I won't let them hold me back. They can either support me or keep enabling my sister, but I warned them that enabling her would end badly. I said I'd only stop posting if the drama stops. I kept things anonymous, and I have the right to vent my frustrations. My mom cried, my dad stayed silent, and I told them tears won't change my mind. They know what they need to do to end this, stop enabling my sister. So my sister called again to yell at me because our parents told her they're not getting involved and she needs to sort things out herself. They also told her to be nicer to me. I could practically see her eyes twitching when she heard that. I was pretty sarcastic with her, and she ended up crying when I hung up. Later, my brother-in-law called to hear my side of the story. He was upset that I'm still posting and made his wife cry, but I explained everything to him, and he said he'd talk to my sister again. I hope this drama ends now, but the family vacation is still on for late June. I've already booked my own room and asked for a day off work so we can leave on a Friday. My room isn't near my parents', sisters', Bill's, and nephew's rooms. It's not even on the same floor. When we go to the coast, if it's not a family activity, I'm going to do what I want. I'll visit art galleries, eat local food, and just enjoy myself for a change. Update 3. The family vacation is over, and some things went as expected, both good and bad. Good because my parents didn't let my sister make me babysit. Oh, she tried, but it didn't work. But it was bad because my sister tried to find out which room I was in, which got her in trouble with her husband again. First, I told the hotel not to give out any of my information to anyone except the police. They promised they wouldn't. On the day of the vacation, I left earlier than the rest of the family. They wouldn't be ready until at least 10 a.m., so I left at 9 a.m. check-in wasn't until 1 p.m., but I wanted to be early. I sent a group text and headed out to make the 3-hour drive. My parents were upset because they had planned a family brunch on the way, but I didn't know about it, so we just had fast food instead. When I got to the hotel, it was too early to check in, but I told the staff not to give out my information to my parents or sister. They said they don't do that, but I told them I know it sometimes happens, so I'm being careful. I told them not to give out my information if my mom, sister, or nephews try to ask for it. They promised only I would have access to my room. Then I went out to eat. When I came back over an hour later, I saw my parents' car and my brother-in-law's SUV. I made sure the lobby was empty before checking in. The clerk said my family asked about me and where I was staying, but they refused to tell them. My sister tried to push it, but her husband stopped her. I checked in, went to my room, and called my parents. I didn't mention what happened with the clerk, and they didn't bring it up either. Then we all met up as a family to go out and explore. At one point, my sister asked me to watch her kids for a bit. I refused because I knew what she was up to. She'd say she'd be back soon, but end up gone for ages. I called her out, and her husband told her to stop asking me to babysit. Instead, she started crying, saying she needed a break. Her husband reminded her that he's tired too, but he's not complaining. My mom gave me a mean look, so I went over and told her if she even thought I should babysit. I'd leave the vacation right then. It's not my job, and I'm tired of them treating me like it is. That made my mom cry too, and she kept saying you're right over and over. It's an old trick of hers to make me feel guilty, but I just said, I am right, and walked away. Neither my mom nor sister tried anything for the rest of the day. When we got back to the hotel after dinner, my family crowded into the elevator, but I waited for the next one. My sister gave me a mean look because she knew what I was up to. I sat in the lobby watching YouTube for 15 minutes before taking the elevator up. I was on a different floor, far away from them. I had a great night. The next morning, we all went out for breakfast, but I made sure they left first. I was the last one out, just like the night before. Breakfast was good. Then I told them I'd be doing my own thing for the day. My mom mentioned plans to go to the aquarium and some other places, so I said I'd meet them later, but the rest of the day was mine. They agreed, and the day went well. When we got back to the hotel that evening, my sister saw me leaving my room. She must have been searching the whole floor to find me. I went back to my room to rest before dinner because I was tired from walking. My sister was nearby. When I left my room for dinner, she tried to corner me and said I'd ruin the vacation for her because she had to take care of her kids alone. I disagreed because our parents were helping her a lot. I told her I'm tired of being blamed for everything and to leave me alone. I started walking, ignoring her yelling. She followed me to the elevator, but we didn't talk. I told my parents and brother-in-law that my sister had stalked me to find my room. She was scolded and she had a pity party. I told her to stop acting like a victim and grow up. The days when she could control me were gone. Then I left the lobby and went to my car. This time I got to dinner first. When everyone else arrived, my sister looked sad, but we didn't talk about what happened before, and that was okay with me. My sister didn't talk to me the whole evening, and I didn't care about riding in the elevator with them. I told them not to disturb me unless it was an emergency because I had the do not disturb sign on my door. The last day went smoothly. Neither my sister nor my mother bothered me. They had given up by then. During the vacation, I played with my nephews a bit. I'm not mean. I just didn't want to babysit. The kids didn't mind. They just wanted to play. I even bought them each a little bag of crystals and stones as a souvenir. There were some small arguments between my sister and her husband, but I ignored them. Overall, I'd say the vacation was a success because my mother and sister realized they couldn't control me anymore. Update 4. My mother and sister saw my last post. They just can't leave things alone. I warned them that if they didn't stop, I'd go back to Reddit, and here I am. The short version is that they freaked out after seeing my post. My sister had been checking my account for days because she knew I'd post something. Well, what did she expect? That I would just say everything was fine. She called me and cried, saying I made her look like a bad mother. I replied, well, if the shoe fits. My sister argued with me more, but I asked her to name anything in the post that wasn't true. She tried, but I pointed out that every detail was correct. So what did she do? She called Mom. Then my mother showed up at my door demanding I delete all the posts. I said no, and now I have more material for another post. I ended up making her leave crying. I had a serious talk with my parents on the phone later. I told them that their support of my sister's behavior caused all the problems in the family. I made it clear that I won't go back to the way things were, so they shouldn't hope for it. My parents then told my sister to stop blaming me and leave me alone. They can't handle the stress anymore. My sister felt sorry for herself, but my parents snapped her out of it. My brother-in-law has a cult. I think he's trying to stay out of the drama, but this can't be good for his marriage or our relationship. So out of respect for him, I'm sorry, but your wife went too far. My parents want my sister to get counseling because she can't handle being a mom and trying to keep up her old habits. She needs to be responsible. I hope this is my last post. If my sister keeps treating me like her personal servant and blaming me for everything, we can't be around each other. Maybe we can move past this if she's willing to change. I won't write anything else about her on Reddit. I'll only talk about my own experiences. If she treats me with respect, this will all be over. Got it? Update 5. My parents and I had a long chat and they apologized. We've decided to keep some distance until Thanksgiving. I also talked with my brother-in-law over beers last night. He's making my sister get counseling or he might leave her. They're finding a counselor for her now. He said my sister was mean to me at home, but she's a loving wife. He also said she had some issues from being an only child. She agreed to counseling and will go when they set it up. They found a babysitter for my nephews too. My brother-in-law also said he was mad at me but didn't help when he should have. We agreed it was a bad situation, so we're putting it to rest. Lastly, these posts helped me get a girlfriend. She figured out it was me and waited for me to say something. We're going on our first date tonight. Thanks to everyone here for the support. It meant a lot.
Clean up your room now. Do you think you're in a position to take a break? Annie's voice cut through the air as she splashed beer on me. The sticky liquid clung to my skin, and the pungent smell of alcohol filled the room. I stood there, stunned by the suddenness of her actions. Annie continued to hurl words at me, but I couldn't grasp what she wanted. I was lost, unsure of what to do or how to respond. Just then, a voice echoed from the computer. The instant I recognized who it was, Annie, who had been red with anger, suddenly froze. Her body tensed, and she collapsed to the floor. My name is Karen, and I'm 33 years old. I work as an administrator at a local company, managing documents and crunching numbers with my calculator. Even though I often thought about using the computer more efficiently, I wasn't in a position to make such suggestions. I had to tread carefully around my superiors, attending company parties out of obligation. My mental health was nearing its limit. There's another mistake in this number. I'm sorry, but you've been making more errors lately. Be careful. Fatigue was taking its toll, leading to more mistakes, and my confidence in my work was crumbling. I began to wonder if quitting this job might be the best option. That's when a man from outside the company started visiting. His name was Andy, the man who would later become my husband. At first glance, Andy's gentle nature was obvious. Even during simple greetings, he treated me with warmth and kindness. Over time, I found myself completely captivated by him. But I lacked the courage to express my feelings, assuming Andy didn't share the same interests. However, a few months after he started visiting the company, Andy surprised me by showing an active interest. Dinners after work turned into dates, and after about 2 years, we decided to get married. After our wedding, I left my job to start a new life with Andy. We visited many properties together, searching for a home we both loved. I was excited about the future, looking forward to the wonderful days ahead. But the life that awaited us was far from what I had imagined. Just a month after our wedding, I began noticing something off about Andy. "Welcome home, Andy. You're back early," I greeted him, but he didn't even look at me. His response was curt. This behavior, so different from before, worried me. He seemed out of sorts, slightly irritated. "Are you okay? You look tired." "Huh? Yeah," he replied, but his mood remained distant. At the time, I'd attributed it to exhaustion and didn't think much of it. But the next day, and the days that followed, Andy's behavior stayed the same. His words, his demeanor, even his actions, like coming home late without any notice, became more careless. I wondered if I had said something to upset Annie. I kept replaying my actions, words, and thoughts about her, trying to pinpoint where I might have gone wrong. But even as time passed, I couldn't figure out what had changed. Then, a few months after Annie's behavior shifted, the situation took a dramatic turn. One evening, during dinner, Annie suddenly began hurling harsh words at me. She hadn't even taken a bite of her food when she said, "Karen, you get it." "Get what?" I asked, taken aback by her abruptness. There was no clear context, and I was unsure how to respond. Without hesitation, she replied, "Your cooking tastes awful." "Awful? Really?" I stammered, shocked by her words. "Yeah, haven't you noticed? I wish you knew how I feel, having to eat such terrible food every day." Throughout our relationship, I had frequently cooked for her, and she had never criticized my cooking like this before. In fact, she used to enjoy the meals I made, often expressing her appreciation. The thought that she now found my cooking unpalatable was completely unexpected. "But you used to enjoy my cooking," I remarked, still trying to process her sudden change in attitude. "Did I?" she replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Seeing my surprised expression, Annie burst into laughter. When she finally stopped, she tossed her knife and fork onto the table and headed to the bedroom, leaving her food untouched. As I stared at the uneaten meal in front of me, I was overwhelmed with mixed emotions. Had she been silently enduring my cooking all this time, or had my skills really declined? No matter how much I pondered it, I couldn't make sense of the situation. I couldn't reach a satisfying conclusion, but one thought kept crossing my mind. Considering Andy's recent behavior and harsh remarks, perhaps he doesn't love me anymore. I used to think he was just tired, but his recent actions seemed excessive. The Andy I knew would have been upfront if something was bothering him. If that's the case, I can't help but wonder if I've done something to offend him. But try as I might, I can't recall doing anything wrong. As my doubts about Andy grew, another 2 months passed, and he became even colder. The warmth and kindness he once showed when we were dating had completely vanished. He started snapping at me daily, showing irritation over the smallest things. "Did you even clean?" he snapped one day. "What? Clean what?" I replied, confused. "The bathroom isn't clean, and the living room is a mess too. I always try to keep the house tidy. I vacuum and organize every day, doing my best to maintain our home. But now, I wondered how much more I needed to do to satisfy him. What was I supposed to do? As I wallowed in disappointment, Andy showered me with even more criticism. But of all the hurtful words he said, the one that stung the most was, "Why did I ever marry a woman like this?" Was his past love for me just an illusion? The thought made tears well up in my eyes. "Wait, are you crying?" "I hope that's not just an act," he scoffed. Once he would have comforted me, now all he offered were cold words. He gave a dismissive snort before heading to the bedroom. We used to share the bed, but lately I've been sleeping elsewhere. More often than not, the living room sofa has become my bed. I felt belittled and ignored by Andy, yet I couldn't figure out what had gone wrong. I lacked the courage to end our relationship because deep down, I still believed in Andy. Unfortunately, my feelings went unnoticed, and his behavior only worsened. "Hey, where's the food?" he'd demand, only to criticize it moments later. "Who can even eat this?" I had suggested eating out several times, but he never agreed and never explained why. The moment he returned from work, he'd start complaining about the dirt at the entrance, the state of the bathroom, or something else, and then sharply demand food. As I noticed the change in his behavior, I tried to figure out the cause. But eventually, I realized he was probably just using me as an outlet for his stress. The inconsistencies in his actions and the way he vented led me to that conclusion. I understood that work could be tiring for Andy, but I wasn't a robot. The constant complaints were taking their toll on me. "Andy, I need to talk to you about something," I said with determination. "I'm stressed from always hearing complaints from you. I know work tires you out, but taking it out on me isn't fair." He looked at me surprised. "What are you talking about?" "I mean every word. Every time you come home from work, you lash out at me, but I'm doing my best too." He smirked, as if mocking my words, but then his face turned red with rage. "You're just a housewife, but the house isn't even clean, and your cooking is terrible. Why shouldn't you get complaints? I can't stand seeing you so relaxed. If there's a specific problem, tell me and I'll try to improve," I offered, trying to find a way to make things better. "No point telling you," he snapped. "You won't change anything. You should figure out what you're doing wrong." He kept dodging my questions, and from this conversation alone, it was clear he only saw me as an outlet for his stress. Expressing my feelings only strained our relationship further. His words grew harsher, and his cold attitude became more prevalent. The happy times we once shared were now a distant memory. I longed for those moments in silence, but my sighs only grew deeper as the days passed. I received a call from an unexpected person, my mother-in-law. We didn't usually communicate often, so I was curious as I answered the phone. "Hello, Karen, how have you been?" She greeted me warmly. I could feel the kindness in her voice, even through the phone. After a bit of chit-chat, she made a surprising proposition. "Handmade crafts?" she asked. "Yes, Karen, didn't you mention that you create handmade items? I've become interested and was wondering if you'd be willing to teach me." I was taken aback. I had been enjoying handmade crafts as a hobby, gathering materials and tools, and immersing myself in my work whenever Andy wasn't around. I had mentioned it to my mother-in-law once but hadn't expected her to remember. Of course I'd love to, I replied, excited by the idea. That conversation led to us speaking more frequently over the phone. At first it was just regular calls, but as we wanted to show each other our work and explain the materials in detail, we started video calling. Though we didn't live too far apart, visiting regularly was difficult. So, at the agreed-upon times, I would sit in the room filled with my crafting tools, and we'd craft together while video chatting. The weariness in my heart, caused by Andy's behavior, felt somewhat eased during these chats with her. "How has Andy been lately?" she asked one day. "I rarely hear from him, so I'm curious." "Oh, he's fine," I answered, keeping my tone light. That's good to know. I hadn't shared the recent troubles with Andy with my mother-in-law, preferring to keep those issues to myself for now. I didn't want to burden her with my troubles. Our time together allowed me to forget about Andy for a while. Even though his behavior remained unchanged and I continued to struggle, I kept all of that hidden from her. But one day, a few weeks after we started video calling, something unexpected happened. After preparing food and cleaning the house, I was video chatting with my mother-in-law when suddenly the door slammed open. It was Andy. I turned to see him standing near the door, holding something in his hand. He seemed completely unaware of the ongoing video call and slowly approached me. "What are you sneaking around doing in here? Did you finish cleaning?" "What about the laundry?" he demanded. "I've already done that," I replied, trying to keep calm. "You saw me doing housework, didn't you?" "I didn't," he snapped. Andy had been engrossed in watching TV in the living room, so his reply wasn't unexpected. "You're always watching TV," I muttered. "What? You're annoying," Andy yelled. "Clean this room now. Do you think you can just take a break?" Then, without warning, he threw what he was holding at me. The smell hit me instantly. It was beer. My clothes were soaked, sticky with the scent of alcohol clinging to them. Andy looked amused by the scene he had just caused. I was so shocked that I couldn't find any words. "Once you understand, get on with the task," he barked before kicking over a pile of books nearby. His displeased laughter echoed throughout the room. I said nothing, just staring at the books soaked in beer. At that moment, an unexpected voice rang out, cutting through the tense silence. "Is that all you have to say?" The voice was familiar, and it was coming from the computer. It was Andy's father, my father-in-law. "Dad?" Andy's voice wavered, his intimidating presence suddenly fading into fear. "I saw everything," my father-in-law said sternly, yelling at Karen, throwing beer at her. "What were you thinking?" "It's not what you think, Dad. It's a misunderstanding," Andy stammered, visibly shaken by his father's anger. "A misunderstanding? What do you mean by that?" his father demanded. "It seems like this isn't the first time something like this has happened, is it? When did you become like this?" My father-in-law's voice was filled with disappointment, the kind that cuts deep. Andy stood silent beside me, no longer the domineering figure he had been just moments before. Then my father-in-law turned to me with an unexpected offer. "Karen, would you come over to our place? Right away. I'm worried about you staying there with Andy. If it's okay with you, I'll come to pick you up right now." His offer caught me off guard, but as I considered it, I realized how unpredictable things could become if I stayed alone with Andy. "Are you sure it's okay?" I asked hesitantly. "No problem at all," he'd assured me. Then, turning back to Andy, he warned, "If you harm Karen anymore, I will never forgive you." With that, he ended the call. I hurriedly packed a few things and waited at the entrance. Andy, visibly unsettled, didn't say a word or try to stop me. After a while, my father-in-law arrived. The moment he stepped through the door, Andy's face showed an unprecedented level of fear. "Andy, you'd better reflect on your actions tonight. Do you understand?" his father said firmly. Andy simply nodded, his fear palpable. Please forgive me," Andy stammered. "What are you saying?" "Apologize to Karen, not me. Remember that, and think hard." After scolding Andy, my father-in-law escorted me outside. Although I had changed into clean clothes, I hadn't had time to shower and still felt sticky. My father-in-law gently wrapped a towel around me and guided me to the car. We soon arrived at his house, where my mother-in-law welcomed us with concern. "Karen, are you all right?" she asked, hugging me warmly. "Yes, I'm sorry," I replied. My mother-in-law led me to the bathroom, handing me towels and a change of clothes. "Take your time," she said. "Here are towels and fresh clothes." "Thank you so much." In the midst of the whirlwind, my emotions were in turmoil. After bathing, I changed into the clothes that had been prepared for me and joined my in-laws in the living room. My father-in-law had a serious expression, while my mother-in-law looked anxious. "Thank you for everything," I said. "You're welcome," my mother-in-law replied. "Was the water temperature okay?" "Yes, it was perfect," I answered, sinking into the sofa. "Karen, can you tell us what happened?" my father-in-law asked. I hesitated, unsure where to begin. So that wasn't the first time, was it?" "No, it wasn't," I admitted. "Please tell us, Karen." I took a deep breath and carefully chose my words. My in-laws listened attentively as I explained the events following our marriage and why I had kept it from them until now. They absorbed every detail. "So that's why it came to this," my father-in-law said after a moment. "You should have told us sooner. We would have understood." "I didn't want to worry you," I replied, my voice breaking slightly. "I understand how you feel, Karen. You shouldn't have kept silent about someone like him," my mother-in-law said gently. "Yes, I'm sorry," I said, feeling a mix of relief and guilt. Though they scolded me softly, their concern was evident, and I felt they genuinely cared about me. There was a brief silence as my in-laws processed everything. After a few minutes, my father-in-law finally broke the silence. "Karen, do you still love Andy?" "Pardon?" "I have a feeling he'll just repeat his mistakes," my father-in-law said firmly. "For your sake, I think it's best if you divorce him. Decisions like this are best made quickly." My mother-in-law, sitting beside him, nodded in agreement. "Divorce Andy," she urged. I was taken aback by the suggestion from his parents. The idea of divorce seemed so final, and despite everything, I still loved him. The thought of him never changing troubled me deeply, yet I felt torn. They waited silently for me to decide. After some thought, I made up my mind. "I will divorce Andy," I said. I had tried to make things work and offered countless suggestions, but he had ignored them all. I believed that if we continued as a married couple, he would only continue to treat me coldly. Relief washed over their faces at my decision. After discussing it further with my in-laws, I was determined to move forward with a divorce. I could finally distance myself from Andy, although a part of me hoped he might change his mind. The overwhelming feeling I had when deciding to divorce was relief. The following week, I went to our house with my in-laws, carrying the court papers, including an affidavit of the defendant. When I rang the doorbell, I heard footsteps approaching, and Andy opened the door. "Karen, Dad, Mom," he greeted, clearly surprised and disappointed to see his parents standing there with me. It was evident he hadn't expected that I wouldn't come alone after everything that had happened. We entered the house and took a seat on the sofa, with my in-laws sitting on either side of me. Andy looked uncomfortable but didn't offer any apologies. I turned to face him directly. "Andy, let's get a divorce." "Divorce?" he repeated, sounding incredulous. "I've been thinking about it. I don't have the courage to envision a future with you anymore. Even if we lived together again, you'd probably repeat the same mistakes and forget what happened before." "That's not true," he said defensively. "Can you honestly claim that you've changed?" I asked. "You haven't even properly apologized for what happened up until last week. You're just offering lip service without showing any genuine regret." "I'm sorry," Andy said, startled by my words. But it was too late. The decision had been made. I had lost all sense of forgiveness toward him. It was too late for anything now. Standing by my in-laws, I reviewed the court papers with resolve. I faced Andy with newfound confidence. "Why would you say that?" I asked, trying to understand his reaction. "What were you thinking? After everything that happened last week, you didn't even apologize to me. It seems you never considered the possibility of divorce. If you truly understood the gravity of your actions, you wouldn't be so shocked by the mention of it." "I realize I made mistakes, but I don't think it's serious enough for a divorce," Andy protested. "Really?" I said, incredulously. "That's unbelievable." Andy seemed to freeze, his previous bravado gone. Though visibly troubled, he eventually agreed to the divorce. Not once did he show genuine remorse. As I packed my things to leave the house, I asked him, "Why did you start treating me so poorly after we got married? You weren't like this when we were dating." Hesitating, Andy replied, "I didn't want you to look down on me." "Did I ever make you feel that way?" I questioned. No, you didn't, he admitted. Stop imagining these absurd things, I said, shaking my head. I then left the house with my in-laws, knowing I would never return. I felt a pang of sadness as I left the home I had loved. After finalizing the divorce, I stayed with my in-laws. My financial situation as a housewife wasn't enough to start a new life alone, so their offer for me to stay was a relief. Initially, I felt uneasy, but I soon adapted to my new life and found joy in doing handmade crafts with my mother-in-law. Throughout this time, I received messages from Andy, who seemed unable to let go. However, after my father-in-law sent a firm message from my phone saying, "I'm cutting ties with you," Andy's communication ceased entirely. I suspected he hadn't anticipated that I'd be living with his parents. Perhaps he thought that keeping in touch after our divorce might lead to reconciliation. It felt as though he was looking down on me. I am genuinely grateful to my in-laws for suggesting the divorce. A year has passed since then, and while working part-time, I lead a fulfilling life on my own. Though I felt bad about relying on them too much, I decided to be independent even after leaving their home. My relationship with my in-laws remains strong, and they continue to support me. Though we are not related by blood, they welcome me with the warmth of a real family. My goal now is to show my gratitude towards them and find ways to bring them joy every day. I live with a heart full of appreciation for my in-laws. Hi, I'm Hazel. I'm 32 and 9 months pregnant with my first baby. Life has been tough lately, and I want to share my story in case it helps anyone else who's going through something similar. I live in San Francisco with my husband, Michael. He's 34 and works as a software engineer. Even though our life might look perfect from the outside, it's actually very difficult. Michael doesn't support me emotionally or help around the house. Most weekends, he's at his parents' house, leaving me to handle everything on my own. Even though I'm pregnant, I love photography, and taking photos of my daily life gives me some happiness. But Michael's lack of support and constant criticism often overshadow that joy. One night, Michael came home and demanded that I go buy beer from the store. I was tired and felt uncared for, but I agreed to go. On the way, I felt hurt and wondered why he couldn't go himself. But I knew arguing with him would only make things worse. When I came back, Michael barely noticed my effort and kept criticizing me. His words hurt a lot, but I tried not to cry. Our relationship had been getting worse, and his behavior was becoming more hurtful. The next morning, Michael acted like nothing happened. He was cheerful and didn't acknowledge the previous night. I decided to cook a special dinner to make things better. I spent the whole day preparing his favorite meal, but when he came home drunk, he insulted me and questioned my worth as a wife and mother. I felt even more isolated and unsupported as my due date got closer. Michael wanted to go on a family trip with his parents, and even though I was worried about traveling so close to my delivery, he ignored my concerns. His parents, who often criticized me, agreed with him. On the day of the trip, my water broke, and I was scared. I told Michael we needed to go to the hospital right away, but instead of helping, he kicked me out of the car, angry that I might mess it up. I felt completely abandoned. Thankfully, our neighbor Na saw me in trouble. Na, who was married to Michael's boss, rushed to help and called an ambulance. She stayed with me at the hospital and offered comfort while I gave birth. Her support was crucial during such a vulnerable time. In the hospital, as I held my baby, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael's neglect and his family's criticism. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Na became a close friend and supported me through everything. She even told her husband about what happened, which was important later on. A video of Michael kicking me out of the car went viral, and the public backlash was huge. Michael lost his job, struggled to find new work, and faced a lot of public shaming. His behavior had severe consequences, and his reputation was damaged. Meanwhile, I found support from my parents and Na. They encouraged me to think about my future and my baby's well-being. I started considering divorce, realizing it was the best option for us. The strong evidence and public pressure made the divorce process easier, and Michael and his family reluctantly agreed to the terms. After my baby was born, my life began to change for the better. I knew I had to make decisions that were right for me and my child. Michael's behavior had become unacceptable, and I had to think about our future. Na continued to support me, visiting the hospital, bringing meals, and offering encouragement. Her husband, Mark, who is the CFO at Michael's former company, also supported me. It was comforting to know they both understood how serious the situation was. After I left the hospital, I moved in with my parents. They are older but very supportive and welcomed me and my baby with open arms. Their home in San Francisco became a safe and comforting place for us. I felt overwhelmed with gratitude for their care and love. As I settled in, I thought a lot about how I ended up here. The viral video of Michael kicking me out of the car had drawn a lot of attention, and the backlash against him was intense. He lost his job, had trouble finding new work, and faced a lot of public shame. Knowing that others saw his true behavior was a small comfort, but it didn't lessen the pain of his betrayal. Despite the chaos, I found peace in my new routine. My parents were wonderful, helping with the baby and giving me emotional support. I also grew closer to Na. She visited often, and our talks became a source of strength for me. She shared her own experiences and gave me advice, becoming a true friend. During this time, I began to think about my legal options. Na suggested talking to a lawyer about divorce. It was a scary thought, but I knew it was necessary for my baby's future. I found a compassionate lawyer who understood my situation. We discussed the details of my marriage, and I showed the evidence of Michael's neglect and abuse. The divorce process began, and it was relatively straightforward due to the public pressure and the viral video. Michael and his family had little choice but to agree to the terms. The process was a relief, though emotionally draining. Meanwhile, I started finding joy in small things again. My passion for photography was rekindled, and I took many pictures of my baby, capturing precious moments. These photos were a reminder of the new life I was building. One day, while walking with Na, she introduced me to her son, Jake. He was around my age, and we quickly became friends. Jake was kind and understanding, qualities I had missed in my relationship with Michael. He often helped me with the baby and offered to babysit, giving me some much-needed time to myself. Our friendship grew, and it started to turn into something more. Jake made me laugh and reminded me that there are good people in the world. My parents also liked him and were happy to see me smile again. It was a slow process, but I was beginning to heal. Na and Mark were incredibly supportive during this time. They helped me with single motherhood and the emotional aftermath of my divorce. Mark gave practical advice, while Na provided a listening ear and warmth. Despite the challenges, I felt empowered, taking control of my life and making decisions for me and my baby. The pain from Michael's neglect and abuse was still there, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger than I had realized. As I adjusted to life as a new mother and dealt with the fallout from my marriage, I found strength in the support around me. My parents, Na and Jake, were my constants, helping me through the toughest days. The divorce was moving forward, though it was emotionally taxing. Michael's family denied his behavior and tried to blame me for everything. Even though it was hard dealing with their criticism, I knew I had to stay strong for my baby. One morning, my lawyer called to tell me that Michael wanted to discuss the divorce settlement. I was nervous but agreed to meet if our lawyers were present. Facing Michael again made me anxious, but it was necessary. The meeting was tense. Michael looked worn out and bitter, blaming me for everything that had gone wrong. His words hurt, but I reminded myself that he was the one who had abandoned me. Our lawyers helped keep the discussion civil. Michael agreed to the terms, including child support and visitation rights. I felt a huge relief as this marked the end of a painful chapter in my life. When I got home, my parents were eager to hear about the meeting. Sharing the details with them felt like a weight lifted off my shoulders. My mother hugged me and said, "You're so strong, Hazel. We're proud of you." Their support was a great comfort. My relationship with Jake continued to grow. He was a positive presence in my life, and one evening he told me, "Hazel, you're amazing. You've been through so much, and yet you're still standing. I admire your strength." His words touched me deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt appreciated and seen. Our bond grew stronger, and soon our friendship blossomed into something more. Jake became a loving part of my baby's life, and my parents were happy to see me happy. However, not everything was easy. Michael's parents kept interfering, calling and demanding to see their grandchild. They refused to accept the damage Michael had caused and acted as if nothing had changed. Dealing with their criticism was exhausting, but I stood firm, setting boundaries to protect my peace. One day, Na invited me over for coffee. We sat in her warm and welcoming kitchen, and she asked how I was doing. I told her about my struggles with Michael's parents and the difficulties of being a single mother. She listened carefully and then said, "Hazel, you've come so far. Don't let anyone take away your peace. You have every right to protect your happiness and your child's well-being." Her words were empowering. Na had become more than just a neighbor. She was a mentor and a true friend. Her husband Mark also helped by advising me on legal matters and explaining my rights. As the months went by, I grew stronger and more confident. I began taking on freelance photography projects, something I had always wanted to do. It felt great to pursue my passion and support my baby. Each photo I took was a sign of the new life I was building. My relationship with Jake continued to grow. He was patient, kind, and truly cared for me and my baby. One evening, while watching the sunset, he looked at me and said, "Hazel, I love you. I know it's been tough, but I want to be there for you and for both of you every step of the way." Tears came to my eyes as I realized how far I had come from feeling abandoned and neglected. I was now surrounded by love and support. I looked at Jake and said, "I love you too. Thank you for being here, for everything." After months of struggle and resilience, my life began to improve. The divorce was finalized and I was finally free from the toxic relationship that had held me back for so long. The day the papers were signed was bittersweet. I felt a sense of loss but also an overwhelming relief. My lawyer, who had been a steady support, said, "This is a new beginning, Hazel. You're doing the right thing for yourself and your child." With the divorce behind me, I focused on creating a stable and happy life for my baby and me. My freelance photography work started to grow, and I found joy in capturing special moments for others. Each project brought me closer to independence and self-fulfillment. Jake continued to be a constant source of support and love. He understood my past and respected my journey. One evening, while having dinner with my parents, Jake proposed to me. It was a simple, heartfelt moment. "Hazel, will you marry me?" he asked, his eyes full of hope. I didn't hesitate. "Yes, Jake, I will," I replied, tears of happiness streaming down my face. My parents were overjoyed, and my heart felt full. Na and Mark were thrilled for us as well. Na, who had been there from the start, gave me a tight hug and said, "You deserve all the happiness in the world, Hazel." I was grateful every day for the unexpected turn our relationship had taken and for the support of everyone around me. Michael and his parents kept trying to interfere, but I stood my ground and set clear boundaries. With Mark's legal advice and support, I made sure they respected our space. Their criticism no longer affected me. I was stronger and more confident, ready to protect my peace and my child's well-being. As time went on, I settled into a new routine. My days were filled with photography sessions, joyful moments with Jake, and the simple pleasures of watching my child grow. Jake was a wonderful father figure, and our home was full of love and happiness. One day, while sitting in Na's garden, we reflected on how much had changed. "You've come so far, Hazel. I'm so proud of you," she said, smiling. I looked around at the beautiful flowers and felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Na. Your friendship means everything to me," I replied. My past, marked by neglect and emotional abuse, had transformed into a story of empowerment and independence. I had found my voice and strength. My life was now surrounded by supportive people who loved me for who I was. To anyone listening, I want to say, no matter how dark and difficult things may seem, there is always hope. Surround yourself with those who uplift and support you. Take it one step at a time and never forget your worth. Empowerment and happiness are within your reach. Thank you for following my journey.
The wine glass shattered against the kitchen floor, red liquid seeping into the grout lines like blood. I stood frozen, watching James stuff designer shirts into his leather weekend bag as if he hadn't just detonated our entire life together. "Ashley?" I repeated, my voice oddly calm. "Your assistant Ashley? The one you said was just an eager intern?" He didn't even look up, just kept methodically packing. "She understands me, Rebecca. She sees my potential, doesn't try to hold me back like you do. My name is Rebecca Mitchell, and after 15 years of marriage, my husband was leaving me for a 23-year-old who still lived with roommates and called herself an aspiring influencer on Instagram." "Hold you back?" I laughed, but it came out hollow. "I supported you through law school, helped you build your practice from nothing. How exactly did I hold you back?" James finally looked up, his handsome face twisted into something I didn't recognize. "By being so damn perfect all the time. The successful investment banker who never makes mistakes." Do you know how suffocating that is? I stared at him, really seeing him for the first time in months. The expensive new clothes, the gym membership he suddenly couldn't live without, the late nights at the office that never quite added up. All the signs had been there, I just hadn't wanted to see them. And the trust fund? I asked quietly, the one we built together? His smile turned smug. Already taken care of, had the papers drawn up last week. Technically, as managing partner of the firm, I had every right to protect our assets. The trust fund, $12 million we'd accumulated over 15 years of careful investing, smart career moves, and sacrifices. My stomach churned as I thought about all those nights I'd stayed late at the office, all the vacations we'd postponed, the family we'd put off starting because we were building something together. Or so I'd thought. You can't just take it, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew he could. James was a corporate lawyer, he knew exactly how to manipulate the system. He zipped up his bag with a flourish. Actually, I can. And I did. Don't worry though, I left you enough to get by. Consider it a parting gift. I watched him stride toward the door of our penthouse apartment, designer bag in hand, looking every bit the successful lawyer about to start his exciting new life. He paused at the threshold, turning back with that practiced courtroom smile. Oh, and Rebecca? Ashley and I are getting married in June. She's always dreamed of a summer wedding. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving me alone in the pristine kitchen I'd redesigned just last year, alone with the shattered wine glass, the seeping stain, and the knowledge that my husband of 15 years had just walked out on me. But here's what James didn't know, what his legal expertise and inflated ego had failed to consider. I wasn't just a successful investment banker, I was damn good at my job. And 3 months ago, when I first noticed the signs, I'd started preparing for exactly this moment. I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer, Margaret Chen. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. It's done, I said simply. He took the bait. Margaret's voice was crisp and professional. Everything in place? Just like we planned. He thinks he cleaned out the trust fund, but, I smiled, feeling the first real spark of satisfaction since James dropped his bombshell. But he has no idea about the offshore accounts, or the shell company, or the fact that I've been documenting every questionable transaction he's made in the last 6 months. There was a pause. Then Margaret chuckled. You really are brilliant, you know that? When you came to me with suspicions about James, I thought you were being paranoid, but you saw it coming. I had. The signs were there if you knew where to look. The sudden interest in cryptocurrency, the new offshore clients, the way he'd started asking pointed questions about our investment portfolio. James thought he was being clever, but 15 years in investment banking had taught me to spot patterns. So I'd prepared, quietly, methodically. I'd moved most of our assets into new accounts he couldn't access, created a paper trail of his suspicious activities, set up a trap that would spring the moment he tried to clean out what he thought was our main trust fund. How long until he figures it out? Margaret asked. I glanced at my watch. The fake trust fund transfer should clear in about an hour. Once he tries to access it, the fraud alert will trigger, and all his recent transactions will be flagged for review. Margaret sounded impressed. You've really thought of everything. Not everything. I hadn't thought about how empty our apartment would feel. Hadn't prepared for the ache in my chest when I looked at our wedding photo still hanging in the hallway. 15 years was a long time to love someone, even if they turned out to be a stranger in the end. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're so lucky James wants to be with me. Don't worry, I'll take good care of him. Ashley. Of course she'd get my number from him. I deleted the message without responding. The next few hours passed in a blur. I methodically went through our apartment, gathering James's remaining belongings into boxes, his favorite coffee mug, the ridiculously expensive golf clubs I'd bought him for Christmas, the framed law degree I'd helped him earn by working extra hours to pay his tuition. Each item felt heavy with memories, with promises now broken. By midnight, I'd filled 6 boxes. They sat by the door like sentries, guarding the remains of my marriage. Then my phone exploded with notifications. First came the angry text from James, "What the hell did you do?" Then 3 missed calls. Finally, an email, his rage evident even in the subject line, "You will regret this." I poured myself a fresh glass of wine, careful to step around the stain from the broken one, and settled in to read his tirade. The email was exactly what I'd expected. Threats of legal action, accusations of manipulation, demands that I fix this immediately or face consequences. Classic James, always believing he held all the cards. I typed out a simple reply. I suggest you check your own accounts. Specifically, the transfers you've been making to Ashley's personal account for the last 3 months. the ones coded as business expenses but sent through your private server. I'm sure the Bar Association would be very interested in those. His response came seconds later, you're bluffing. I wasn't. I had everything, every transaction, every coded email, every falsified expense report. I'd watched him dig his own grave for months, collecting evidence while he was distracted by his midlife crisis and his young girlfriend. Another text from Ashley popped up. James is really upset. What did you do to him? This is so toxic. I blocked her number. The doorman called up to inform me that James was in the lobby, demanding to be let up. I declined. Let him stew overnight. Tomorrow would be soon enough to begin dismantling the life we'd built together. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked tired, but there was something else there too, a strength I hadn't noticed before, maybe hadn't needed until now. I thought about the day James and I met, both young and ambitious, believing we'd take on the world together. We had, in a way, we'd built something remarkable. I just hadn't realized he'd been planning his exit strategy while I was planning our future. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Margaret, everything's in motion. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. She was right. Tomorrow would be the day James discovered exactly what happened when you underestimated your wife. But for now, I needed rest. I crawled into our king-sized bed, my bed now, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the city below. 15 years of memories echoed through the empty apartment, but for the first time since James walked out, I didn't feel like I was drowning in them. Instead, I felt something unexpected, anticipation, because tomorrow, James would learn that his carefully planned escape with his young girlfriend wasn't going to go quite the way he'd imagined. Tomorrow, he'd discover that the woman he'd dismissed as predictable and suffocating had outmaneuvered him at every turn. Tomorrow, the real games would begin. The next morning, I woke to 17 missed calls and over 30 text messages. James had been busy. His messages devolved from angry demands to desperate pleas as the night wore on, ending with a final text at 4:37 a.m., we need to talk, please. I took my time getting ready, selecting a crisp white blazer and my favorite Louboutins. If I was going to watch my husband's world implode, I wanted to look impeccable doing it. Margaret called while I was doing my makeup. Are you ready for this? He's been calling my office since 6 a.m. I'm ready, I said, applying a final coat of red lipstick. Is everything in place? The bank has frozen all the suspicious transfers. The Bar Association received our anonymous tip about his creative accounting, and that private investigator's report you commissioned? It's devastating. I smiled at my reflection. Perfect. Time to end this. The law firm of Mitchell Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming downtown high-rise. James had insisted on the location when we first opened it, claiming the view helped close deals. I hadn't set foot in the building since I'd first suspected his affair, but I still had my key card. Some things he'd forgotten to take away. When I stepped off the elevator, the office was in chaos, staff huddled in corners, whispering. Ashley was nowhere to be seen, but her desk had been cleared out. James's office door was closed, blinds drawn. Mrs. Mitchell, his secretary, Linda, rushed over. She'd been with us since the beginning, had watched us build this firm from nothing. He's been asking for you all morning. It's bad. I know, Linda, I said gently. Why don't you take an early lunch? This might get uncomfortable. She nodded gratefully and grabbed her purse. As she passed, she squeezed my arm. For what it's worth, I never liked her. Too obvious with those short skirts and giggling. I approached James's office, my heels clicking against the marble floor. Without knocking, I pushed open the door. The great James Mitchell looked like hell. His perfectly styled hair was a mess, his expensive shirt wrinkled. He sat behind his massive desk, surrounded by papers and empty coffee cups. What did you do? He demanded as soon as he saw me. The accounts are frozen. The Bar Association is asking questions. Even my personal cards are being declined. I sat down across from him, crossing my legs, calmly. I protected myself. Something you taught me, actually. Remember when you said every good lawyer has a contingency plan? This isn't protecting yourself. He snarled. This is sabotage. You've ruined everything. No, James. You did that when you decided to sleep with your assistant and steal our money. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through messages. Speaking of Ashley, have you talked to her this morning? Since her bank flagged those transfers as potential fraud? His face paled. You wouldn't. I already did. Turns out, moving firm money through personal accounts to pay your girlfriend looks a lot like embezzlement, especially when you code it as business expenses. He slumped in his chair, the fight draining from him. How long have you known about Ashley? 3 months. About the money? Longer. I'm an investment banker. James, did you really think I wouldn't notice strange transfers and offshore accounts? Rebecca, we can fix this, he said, leaning forward. His voice took on that persuasive tone he used in court. We'll tear up the divorce papers. I'll end things with Ashley. We can go back to Dash. Back to what? I cut him off. Back to you lying to me? Back to me pretending I don't know who you really are. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. No, James, we're not going back. In fact, I'm here to discuss the future of Mitchell Associates. His eyes narrowed. What about it? I smiled. The same smile he'd given me yesterday when he thought he'd won. Check your email. You'll find some interesting documents from our biggest clients. They're not happy about the rumors of financial impropriety. Most of them are taking their business elsewhere. You can't do this, he whispered. This firm is my life. Our life. I corrected him. We built it together. Remember? With my connections. My trust fund to get it started. And now? Now it's just another asset to be divided in the divorce. His phone buzzed, probably Ashley realizing her gravy train had derailed. He ignored it, staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. Why? He asked finally. Why go through all this? You could have just divorced me. I leaned across his desk, meeting his eyes. Because you thought I was weak. Predictable. You thought you could discard 15 years of marriage and walk away with everything we built. I needed you to understand exactly who you were walking away from. As if on cue, Linda appeared in the doorway. Mr. Mitchell? There are some gentlemen here from the Bar Association. They're asking about an ethics complaint? James's face crumpled. His perfectly planned escape was falling apart. Piece by piece, the money he thought he'd secured, frozen. The girlfriend he'd risked everything for, gone radio silent once the cash dried up. The reputation he'd spent years building, about to be scrutinized by his peers. You'll never get away with this, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave him to face the consequences of his choices. I already have. Oh, and James? Ashley posted some interesting photos last night. You might want to check her Instagram. Apparently, she's already found someone new, someone whose accounts aren't frozen. I walked out of his office, head high, leaving him to deal with the Bar Association investigators. The staff watched me go, their expressions a mix of awe and sympathy. They'd figure out soon enough that Mitchell Associates would survive just under new management. Outside, the summer air felt clean and fresh. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Just got the preliminary divorce agreement drafted. You're going to like it. I smiled, thinking about the future stretching out before me. The firm would need restructuring, clients would need reassuring, but for the first time in months, I felt truly free. That evening, I returned to my apartment. The boxes of James's things still sat by the door, but they no longer felt heavy with memories. They were just boxes, filled with the belongings of a man who had underestimated his wife. I poured myself a glass of wine, carefully, this time, and walked out onto the balcony. The city sparkled below, full of possibilities. My phone had been quiet for hours. James was probably too busy dealing with the ethics investigation to harass me further. A text came through from an unknown number. I'm sorry, Ashley. I almost laughed. Sorry she got caught. Probably. Sorry the money dried up. Sorry she'd bet on the wrong horse. I blocked her number again and turned back to the view. Somewhere out there, James was realizing that his perfect escape plan had backfired spectacularly. His young girlfriend had vanished, his assets were frozen, and his professional reputation was in tatters. Meanwhile, I had emerged stronger than ever. The firm would survive under my leadership. The trust fund he'd tried to drain was safely secured, and I had finally shed the role of perfect, predictable wife. 3 months later, I sat across from James one last time, signing our divorce papers. He looked older, tired. The ethics investigation had resulted in a suspension of his law license. Ashley, true to form, was already engaged to someone else, a fact she'd announced on social media with gleeful abandon. I never saw it coming, he said quietly as we finished signing. Any of it. I thought I knew you. That was your mistake, I replied, gathering my papers. You saw what you wanted to see, the supportive wife, the reliable partner. You forgot that I'm also a woman who knows her worth. I stood to leave, but he called after me. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, not just for Ashley, but for underestimating you, for thinking I could outsmart you. I paused at the door, looking back at the man I'd once loved. Goodbye, James. I hope she was worth it. The door clicked shut behind me, echoing with finality. In my purse, my phone buzzed with work notifications, client meetings to schedule, decisions to make. Life went on. That night, I finally cleaned up the wine stain from the kitchen floor. As I scrubbed, I thought about the day James left, thinking he'd orchestrated the perfect exit. He hadn't realized he was actually setting himself up for the greatest fall of his life. Sometimes the perfect revenge isn't about getting even, it's about showing someone exactly what they lost and making sure they live with that knowledge forever. I never told James about the second offshore account, the one even Margaret didn't know about. Some secrets, after all, are better kept, just like some lessons are better learned the hard way. The wine stain finally faded, leaving no trace of that fateful day. Like James's presence in my life, it had seemed permanent at first, a mark that would never fade, but with enough patience, enough determination, anything can be erased. Well, almost anything. The lessons? Those I'd keep forever.
Sarah is completely useless in the kitchen, Jake declared, causing the room to grow icy as everyone's eyes shifted toward me. Bolstered by their reaction, Jake's voice grew louder. Have you ever tasted a meal I've made, or are all your meals eaten at your lover's house? I took a deep breath and held up the documents that proved Jake's infidelity. This is no joke, I said firmly, pointing to the evidence in my in-law's hands. My name is Sarah. I'm 35 years old and I've always been somewhat intimidated by assertive men, to the point where I felt afraid. Because of this, I rarely dated and had few interactions with men. As I approached 40, my concerned parents suggested an arranged marriage. Initially, I refused, but given my limited dating experiences and their persistence, I agreed to a few matchmaking sessions. It was at one of these sessions that I met Jake. He was kind, serious, and straightforward, a successful employee at a major company. Despite his imposing physique, he didn't intimidate me at all. The matchmaking went smoothly, and soon we were planning our marriage and meeting his parents. Jake's family was well known in the equestrian world, running their own farm. His father was a man of few words, while his mother was elegant and gentle with charming dimples that appeared when she smiled. Before I knew it, Jake and I were set to marry. As part of the agreement, I became a full-time housewife and left my clerical job at the electronics company. My colleagues teased me about marrying into wealth, and my parents were thrilled. Looking back, I believe that was the peak of my happiness. Jake had assured me that his demanding job would keep him away often, but he promised it would only be for a while. He planned to support the family business after achieving his career goals. I admired his dedication and decided to support him. However, as the years passed, Jake's absences became more frequent and prolonged. I knew he wouldn't be home often, but not to this extent. I waited alone in our condo, a wedding gift from his parents. I wondered if he'd even come home that night. I had only managed to cook for him a few times as his returns were so rare and unpredictable. His business trips left the house empty for days, and he would often dine out, returning home late at night. Despite his late returns, Jake would wake up early and leave without breakfast, which worried me. I was concerned about his health and well-being. One morning, as Jake prepared for the day, I asked, Jake, I really want you to eat healthy meals. Why don't you eat at home? He didn't meet my gaze, busy adjusting his tie. Don't worry, work is just particularly demanding right now, he replied briefly before leaving. Jake worked from early morning until late at night, including weekends and holidays, with frequent business travels. Initially, I wondered if he was avoiding me or if something was wrong between us. His constant absence made me feel almost like I was living alone. Jake owned very few personal items, which added to the feeling of solitude. We hardly spoke, so I knew almost nothing about his interests or preferences. Sometimes, I questioned if I was at fault. I spoke to my parents, but they simply said that it was better for a man to be busy. My few friends also thought it was ideal for a husband to be occupied without deeply considering my feelings. Although Jake managed our finances well and provided for our daily needs, which meant I had no financial worries, this stability only seemed to heighten my anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was to blame for Jake's distance, constantly wondering if I had done something to drag him away. My sense of inadequacy as a wife consumed me, leading me to obsess over cleaning and improving my cooking skills during the rare moments we were together. Whenever Jake noticed my anxious expression, he would reassure me, saying, Sarah, you're doing everything right. Reluctantly, I came to accept that this might be the norm for our marriage. Then, at the end of the year, I received an unexpected call from my father-in-law. His angry voice wooed from the other end of the line, causing me to nearly drop the phone. Sarah, what on earth do you think you're doing? He demanded. Why haven't you attended the family gathering? Confused, I asked, what do you mean? Has something happened? "Don't play dumb," he scolded. "Why haven't you come to the family gatherings every year?" I was taken aback. I had never been informed of any annual family events. I recalled discussing Christmas greetings with Jake, who had mentioned that his father preferred not to have many people in his house and that family gatherings were kept to a minimum. He had also said that it was too hectic with too many relatives, so each year, only Jake would visit his parents with Christmas gifts. "You should at least apologize for not participating," his father said sternly, making me tremble. I had always stayed home during Christmas while Jake visited his parents, careful to send warm greetings and messages to maintain proper etiquette. I had suggested making a phone call, but Jake said it was a busy time and that it wasn't necessary. I was relieved to avoid confronting my strict father-in-law, but felt a pang of guilt as I learned that all the relatives gathered for a Christmas party. I apologized profusely over the phone, but my father-in-law left a harsh remark before ending the call. My mind was filled with doubts. What did Jake mean by saying it was no problem if I didn't participate? Why did he convey the wrong information about the family gathering? Did he not want me to attend at all? That night, when Jake returned home, I decided to confront him. "I received a call from your father today," I said. "He scolded me for not attending the Christmas party." Jake gave a rueful smile, sighed, and replied, "It can be stressful to go where there are many people. Wives usually don't want to visit their in-laws' homes, and I was just considering your feelings." I was surprised by Jake's thoughtfulness. I knew many people dread visiting their spouse's family, as my friends often complain, but that didn't mean they never attended. Despite Jake's insistence that it was okay to skip the gathering, I felt compelled to attend this year and overruled him. The Christmas gathering at his family's home was lavish, with numerous relatives exchanging greetings and gifts. "You finally showed up as a member of the family," my father-in-law said coldly. "It's only natural to participate in such events." Even after I explained that I had been told there was no gathering, his anger didn't subside. "Were you avoiding us because you don't like seeing everyone here?" His intense anger left me speechless, and I had no energy left to argue. The relatives watched from a distance, their silent scrutiny understandable. I chose to endure the situation patiently, but I couldn't forgive Jake for his complete lack of support. He continued to drink silently, and as time went on, his alcohol consumption increased. Meanwhile, everyone came to me to voice their grievances. "Jake says he's never seen you working around the house," they complained. I wanted to retort that Jake was rarely home, and that when I did cook, it was often after he had already eaten out. Each complaint from the relatives felt like a stab in the heart. What kind of negative stories was Jake sharing about me? I couldn't understand why he was painting such a bleak picture. My only response to their harsh words was a stiff apology. "I'm sorry. I will be more mindful from now on," I said, trying to maintain my composure amid their piercing stares. I did my best to assist with the cooking and serving during the Christmas party, and after the cleanup the next day, I was completely exhausted. Jake went straight to work from his parents' house, and we spent the day apart. Returning home, I took a deep breath and reflected on the strange situation. Why had Jake claimed there was no family gathering? Why was he telling people that I neglected household chores? Was this related to his frequent absences? My concerns grew, and I felt I had to investigate further. With time on my hands, I decided to track Jake's behavior, a practice I had seen in detective TV series. Jake left early in the morning, and I discreetly followed him. Knowing where he worked made this task easier, and I felt a thrill from my covert operation, finding it more engaging than staying idle at home. I spent the day lingering in nearby cafes and restaurants, keeping a watchful eye on his office. Jake's activities that day were unremarkable, and he returned to his office in the evening. I continued my surveillance from a cafe with a view of his company. At around 7:00 p.m., Jake left the office. Was he leaving work early today? If he went straight home, he would discover my own absence, so I needed to return quickly. I arrived home before Jake, prepared dinner, and waited for his return. However, he didn't come back until late at night. Something felt off. Determined to uncover the truth, I resolved to monitor Jake's actions again the next day. His routine was almost identical to the previous day. He went to work, left the office for a while, and then returned in the late afternoon. But what happened after that remained unclear. While observing from a different restaurant that evening, around 6:00 p.m., Jake left his office once again. Unlike the previous day, I didn't rush home immediately. I decided to follow Jake discreetly. Instead of heading towards the nearest train station, he walked in the opposite direction. I hesitated but decided to continue following him. He made his way to a lively area filled with hotels. Despite my resolve, I briefly lost sight of him while scanning the surroundings. Suddenly, Jake appeared right in front of me. We both froze, staring at each other in surprise. Jake was the first to speak. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I was at a loss for words. "What are you doing here, Jake? What have you been up to all day?" I was taken aback. I was supposed to be the one investigating him, but now I was the one being questioned. "Go home now," he said. "We'll talk about this later." Being scolded by Jake on the spot was humiliating. I hurried back home. When Jake returned late at night, he bombarded me with startling words. "I don't know what you're doing at home, but following me around. Why should I support someone like that?" I tried to defend myself. "I've been handling the household chores. Do you think you've done your part just by doing a bit of cleaning?" "From now on," Jake said, "you'll have to manage with just $100 for living expenses." I was speechless. How was I supposed to live on just $100? The gas and electricity bills come from my account, and he hadn't contributed a cent to my food. Jake just smirked. "Then let me look for a job. I want to work part-time." Jake's lips twisted coldly. "Part-time isn't good enough. Find a full-time job and don't neglect the household chores." No matter how much I protested, Jake's determination was unwavering. As a result, I ended up returning to my previous job at the electronics company. My days became a blur of managing both work and household tasks. I had no time for anything else, not even for my brief detective pursuits. Jake became unusually strict with me, criticizing every little mistake. During the short moments we saw each other in the morning, he would complain about fingerprints on the windows, dirt on the stairway, and wrinkles in his shirts. He always found something to criticize before leaving for work. Since I was also working all day, I could only address his complaints at night. The days passed quickly as I juggled my responsibilities, and before I knew it, the end of the year and the Christmas family gathering approached. Jake was adamant that I should not attend. "You should stay home. There's no need for you to come to the gathering," he said. Feeling that arguing was futile, I remained silent. Just before he left, Jake delivered a final harsh remark. "Someone like you is too disgraceful to introduce to relatives." I was stunned by Jake's biting remarks, unable to understand how he could speak so harshly when I was working tirelessly and managing everything at home. Determined to confront the truth, I decided to attend the Christmas gathering unannounced, feeling it was important for his family to witness his true nature. I tightly gripped the thick envelope that had just arrived as I approached his family's house. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door and stepped inside. Jake, upon seeing me, looked surprised but quickly masked his reaction, glaring at me while keeping his silence due to the presence of other guests. The relatives' gazes were icy and I could hear their whispered criticisms. I knew they had been deceived by Jake's version of events, but I remained unfazed. Despite their cold stares, I went to the kitchen to help with the food and drinks. As the evening wore on, and Jake drank more, his restraint seemed to loosen, and he began to voice his criticisms more openly. "Sarah is useless," he declared. "Even when she's in the kitchen, she doesn't cook properly at home." The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to me, their cold stares now focusing on my direction. Encouraged by the reaction, Jake's criticism grew louder. "The meals she makes are terrible," he announced. My father-in-law's sharp gaze zeroed in on me. "What does this mean?" he demanded sternly. "Isn't this highly inappropriate for Jake's wife?" Feeling the weight of the moment and the collective attention of the relatives, I decided it was time to stand my ground. I stepped forward and confronted Jake directly. "Have you ever actually eaten the food I've made? Aren't all your meals at your lover's place?" I challenged. My father-in-law's mouth dropped open in shock, and the room was filled with stunned silence. Only Jake seemed to panic, trying to salvage the situation. "Sarah, why are you making up such lies just because you're being criticized?" he stammered. Jake tried to defend himself to his father. "Dad, I don't have a mistress," he insisted, hoping his father would take his word over mine. But my father-in-law seemed torn, wanting to believe Jake. "Are you out of your mind, making up stories like this all of a sudden?" Jake said, dismissing my claims. But the accusation of Jake having a mistress wasn't just a passing joke. It was a serious matter. I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope, handing the documents inside to my father-in-law. Jake, continuing his barrage of insults, demanded, "Apologize right now." If you do, I might overlook the fact that you lied. The relatives, seemingly convinced that Jake was innocent, maintained their cold stares toward me. As my father-in-law and mother-in-law carefully examined the documents, I braced myself. The papers were a detailed report from a private investigator I had hired after my own amateur sleuthing revealed troubling patterns in Jake's behavior. The investigation confirmed my fears. Jake was indeed having an affair. While I struggled to manage on $100 a month, balancing a full-time job and household duties, Jake was living comfortably with his mistress, spending most of his time at her place and even dining there daily. I had stumbled upon Jake in a bustling district lined with hotels, just as he was about to meet his mistress. With a firm voice, I declared, "This is no joke. Here's the evidence." I pointed to the documents in the hands of my in-laws. Murmurs of disbelief swept through the relatives. "Jake, is this true? Explain yourself," they demanded. The father-in-law and mother-in-law scrutinized the report, flipping through the pages. Jake, sweat forming on his brow, vehemently denied the accusations. "No, that can't be. I don't have a mistress," he protested. The documents contained numerous photos, including shots of Jake entering an apartment that wasn't ours, holding hands with an unknown woman. Other images showed him selecting jewelry with her, enjoying wine at a trendy restaurant, and shopping for groceries. In every photo, Jake's carefree smile was evident. I confronted him directly. "You always talked about how hard you were working. Is this how you spent your time?" Jake's face drained of color as he struggled to find words, clearly caught off guard by the overwhelming evidence. I continued, my voice rising with anger. "Why did you lie about not wanting to see the relatives or about the food tasting bad? Why distort the truth until the very end?" Jake persisted in trying to twist the facts, and I was deeply disappointed by his reaction. The room fell silent during our heated exchange. Then, my mother-in-law's sharp voice cut through the tension. "Jake, what on earth are you thinking?" Her voice, usually calm and composed, was now harsh and fierce. Even Jake seemed taken aback by her authoritative tone. She turned to me, her expression intense. "Are you trying to claim that all this evidence is false? Explain yourself properly." Her sudden shift from calm to furious was both frightening and compelling. The relatives stood silent, clearly intimidated by her presence. Jake, kneeling, began to speak in a subdued voice. "I've been involved with this woman since before our marriage. We met in a shop in New York." Murmurs of disbelief spread among the relatives as both my father-in-law and mother-in-law glared at Jake, their expressions stern. Jake's eyes were wet with tears and droplets fell to the floor. "I thought I could just marry someone suitable and live separately." "That suitable person you're referring to is me," I interjected. Jake bowed deeply. "I'm sorry. I thought you weren't interested in marriage, so as long as I provided money, it would be fine. I was wrong. I want to marry her. A life without love or affection with you wasn't what I wanted. I needed a way out." I was stunned by his admission. "Do you realize how incredibly selfish you're being right now?" Jake's voice trembled. "I'm truly sorry. I thought I'd only be considered an adult if I got married, and I thought once married, I wouldn't face nagging." He had assumed that while his parents were strict about marriage, they wouldn't interfere with a subsequent remarriage. He wanted to divorce first, so he could be open about his affair, and then remarry without issue, shifting the blame onto me while portraying himself as the victim. Jake's decision to set the monthly allowance to $100 was clearly meant to hinder my investigation into his affair. With so little money, I would have had no means to dig further, and taking a full-time job would only reduce my time for probing. However, Jake hadn't anticipated that I might hire a private detective. His short-sighted actions led to this moment of public humiliation. Infidelity was always condemned in our family, and Jake's betrayal of me after all my efforts was unforgivable. My mother-in-law's anger was palpable. Her temples bulged with rage as she confronted him. Jake, sobbing and sniffling, pressed his face to the floor, his tears and runny nose mixing in a pitiable display. "You are a disgrace to this family," my mother-in-law declared. "From now on, you are to sever all ties with us." The shock among the relatives was evident. It was clear that her word was final, and the father-in-law nodded in quiet agreement. There was no longer a place for Jake in the family. His infidelity and lies had led to his disarmament. Jake stumbled to his feet and left the room in tears. After he departed, my mother-in-law approached me, taking my hand with a firm grip and bowing her head. "Sarah, I am so sorry for Jake's unforgivable behavior. Please divorce him, she pleaded. The father-in-law also expressed his regret. We fully trusted Jake and never imagined he could do such a thing. I deeply apologize for accusing you unjustly and shouting at you, he said. Though usually reticent and stern, he was remarkable in his ability to admit mistakes and apologize. The mother-in-law, holding back tears, continued to support me, revealing her strength as the backbone of the family. Jake's behavior was a stark contrast to the values instilled by such wonderful parents. Eventually, I reconciled with my in-laws, and the divorce proceedings with Jake were swiftly finalized. As Jake had hoped, once disowned by the family, he lost his prestigious family backing. His career was affected, he was removed from any path to promotion and now worked as an ordinary employee with significantly reduced income. His mistress also left him abruptly, ending their relationship. I received a fair division of assets from Jake, along with a generous amount from his family, and with the unexpected money, I enjoy occasional trips abroad. I continue to live comfortably in the marital flat, which I was allowed to use freely. Jake's presence is barely felt, and I lead a relaxed life. Despite the scandal, I've managed to return to work and now have a stable income, securing my future. I still occasionally communicate with my in-laws and am even invited to family gatherings at Christmas, though I politely decline. At a barbecue party hosted by Scene's workplace, I faced an unsettling situation. Scene, my husband, took every opportunity to make disparaging remarks about me. He openly criticized my lack of involvement in housework, comparing me to a parasite and expressing disdain for other men's wives. As I listened to his hurtful comments, I could feel the cold, judgmental stares of his colleagues piercing through me. Their looks stung deeply, leaving me in considerable pain. But today, I am no longer the person who stays silent. With a newfound determination, I decided to reveal the truth about Scene. The murmurs of his colleagues and the astonished expressions of his female coworkers were palpable, but it was the company president's reaction that truly shocked everyone. My name is Helen, and I'm 32 years old. I work at a variety store and have been with the company since graduation. I had always envisioned a long career there, but the stress from interpersonal conflicts eventually became too much. After 3 years, I resigned before I reached a breaking point. I took various jobs in supermarkets and bookstores, but eventually, I found my place at the variety store. This job was a dream come true for me, given my love for collecting knickknacks. It offered the best work environment I had ever experienced, and I began to enjoy my days at work. Despite the positive changes in my professional and personal life, I faced a challenge. I was still single. As friends around me married and formed relationships, I felt the pressure to seriously consider marriage myself. However, with no man at my workplace and limited opportunities to meet new people due to my indoor hobbies, I felt stuck. I envied the couples I saw and longed to meet someone special. One day, while working at the store, a friend stopped by as a customer. With the store quiet, we started chatting and eventually discussed romance. I confessed my lack of romantic prospects, and my friend, though not interested in marriage herself, offered to set up a mixer for me. At this mixer, I met Scene, a handsome and successful man from a top company. We began dating, and after a while, he proposed. His stability, kindness, and the way he prioritized me made me feel that this was true happiness. The joy of his proposal was beyond words. As a housewife, I devoted myself to managing our home, ensuring Scene could unwind and relax when he was home. I took great care to cook Scene's favorite dishes and keep our home spotless. "Hey, this is my favorite. Did you make it?" he'd ask with a smile that brightened my day. "Yes, eat as much as you like," I'd reply, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction from his happiness. Scene would spend his holidays with me, actively helping around the house, and I felt incredibly blessed. The worries about never finding a partner seemed like a distant memory. However, a few months into our marriage, things began to change. The initial happiness faded and Scene grew distant and cold. His once warm demeanor turned into an unsettling indifference, leaving me unsure of how to handle it. "Scene, what time will you be home today?" I'd ask, only to be met with vague responses. "I don't know," he'd say, a stark contrast to his previous informative replies. Even when I inquired about his dinner preferences, he would brush it off with, "I don't need dinner tonight." I wondered if he was simply tired or overwhelmed with work. I understood the demands of a busy schedule, having experienced them myself, but Scene's job at a renowned corporation seemed beyond my comprehension. I'd send him off each morning with a cheerful "take care," but it began to feel like an irritation to him. He started showing disinterest in my cooking and would sometimes refuse the lunch I prepared. Sighing, I'd pore over my recipe books, trying to find inspiration to make meals that would please him. Yet each glance at those books only deepened my loneliness. I agonized over when we might share joyful moments again, but Scene's attitude remained unchanged and continued to worsen. For example, if he saw a slight disorder in the shoes in the closet, he'd criticize, "Can't you even line up the shoes properly?" And if he happened to eat a meal I had prepared after a long time, he'd mock, "I can't believe you'd serve something like this." He even went as far as saying, "I'd rather eat a ready meal than your cooking." The shock and disappointment I felt were profound. He used to praise my cooking and ask for seconds, but now it seemed like everything I did was wrong. The more I struggled, the more I questioned Scene's past behavior. Then, unexpectedly, Scene spoke to me. "Hey, we're having dinner with my parents in a week at a fancy restaurant. Please dress appropriately." This simple conversation made my heart leap with a mix of hope and anxiety. I was excited to meet my in-laws for the first time since Scene and I got married. We hadn't had a formal wedding, so this dinner felt like a significant occasion. Both my father-in-law and mother-in-law had always seemed warm and welcoming, similar to how Scene was in the past. To prepare, I paid extra attention to my skincare and hair and bought a special outfit for the restaurant. I was eager to reunite with them. However, when I finally met them, their demeanor was strikingly different from what I had expected. They openly expressed their dissatisfaction with me. I struggled to understand why, until my mother-in-law's words made things clear. "Helen, I've heard that you're always slacking off on household duties and lazing around at home. Is that true? It's fine to be a full-time housewife, but neglecting cooking and cleaning isn't acceptable." "I didn't expect this from you," she said. My father-in-law echoed her sentiments, adding, "There must be some misunderstanding here. Or rather, it seems Scene has been giving us incorrect information." I tried to defend myself. "That's not true at all." But Scene interrupted with a scolding tone. "Come on, lying isn't good. You're just lazing around, aren't you?" I was shocked by their perception of me. My mother-in-law continued, "I was a full-time housewife too, but I worked hard every day to keep the house in order for my working husband. Don't you have any gratitude towards Scene?" Before I could respond, Scene cut me off again, insisting that only he could speak to my in-laws about me. It became clear that he had deliberately conveyed misleading information. The betrayal hurt deeply. My attempts to explain were futile, and to someone who doesn't know me well, I might appear as a woman who married for financial security. The thought of being judged this way was chilling. After the dinner, I was left feeling disheartened and misunderstood. I confronted Scene about the lies he told his parents. "Why did you lie? I've been working hard and cleaning every day. What are you dissatisfied with?" I asked, my frustration mounting. Scene didn't answer, only telling me to be quiet. The silence that followed was heavy and disheartening. I was at a loss for how to address the misunderstanding with my in-laws and was desperate to understand why Scene's attitude had shifted so dramatically. I wished he would clearly communicate if my behavior was a problem. If not, some explanation was necessary. I felt overwhelmed with anxiety as Scene continued to avoid meaningful conversation. His behavior toward me deteriorated further. He criticized the food I cooked, made a fuss over a single strand of hair as if I never cleaned, and scolded me for simply relaxing on the sofa. Scene's return home became increasingly erratic, often coming back at midnight or not at all. Despite this, I refrained from arguing with him. He was the only partner I had ever found, and though he was distant now, I hoped he might return to the person he once was. The fear of never marrying again and potentially spending my life alone was paralyzing. The thought of divorce was terrifying, and I didn't have the courage to leave him. Around the time Scene started coming home at dawn, I noticed something troubling. A faint scent of unfamiliar women's perfume on his suit, along with traces of red lipstick. These clues made me suspect an affair. Although I had been wary of his frequent overnight stays and absences under the guise of work, the abrupt change in his behavior and these new signs only intensified my doubts. I was consumed by anger and confusion. The thought that he might be spending nights with someone else filled me with anguish. I didn't want to lose Scene, but if he was indeed cheating, that was a different matter entirely. I decided it was time to confront Scene about the truth. "Hey, I need to talk to you," I said as he was unusually home on the weekend. "It's really important." Despite my insistence, Scene remained engrossed in the TV, ignoring me. "Are you listening?" I raised my voice. What is it? Scene finally responded, clearly annoyed by my anger. Are you cheating on me? I asked directly. What? What are you talking about? He replied, feigning confusion. There's lipstick on your jacket, and I can smell women's perfume and fabric softener that's not from our house. All those times you said you were working late were lies, I pressed. C responded with a dismissive attitude. Lipstick? I don't know what you're talking about. I continued to press him. You're having an affair, aren't you? Tell me the truth. Scene's response was cold and indifferent. What does it matter to you if I had an affair? He said, as if it was of no consequence. No matter how seriously I questioned him, he just sneered and shrugged it off. Hey, answer me seriously. I've had enough, I demanded, but my frustration didn't seem to reach him. You're annoying and too persistent. I have my circumstances and you live off my money, so just listen to what I say, he retorted, then left the house. The exchange made it clear that Scene's heart was no longer in our relationship. Once I realized that, my feelings for him rapidly cooled. Why had I clung to him for so long? Continuing the marriage with someone so indifferent would only wear me down emotionally. Stirred by my newfound clarity, I decided to take action. 2 months later, I attended a barbecue organized by Scene's workplace. His company had invited employees and their families, and Scene, having heard that other employees were bringing their families, reluctantly invited me. His parents were there, and by the time I arrived, they were already preparing the meat. Scene, I've been waiting, I greeted. Oh, you came. Hallen was the one who wanted to come and kept insisting, Scene replied, causing his parents to glare at me. As the barbecue started, many people, regardless of rank, gathered around Scene. At home, he acted so differently, but in public he behaved as if we were close friends. I was furious to hear Scene speaking ill of me at the barbecue, which was supposed to be a fun event. She's really useless, he said, making disparaging remarks about me. I was certain he was doing the same at work. None of the other employees stopped him, and they all looked at me coldly. The crowd continued to gather around Scene, and it seemed the company president was among them. Scene, this is your wife, the one people have been talking about, the president remarked, with me standing right there. You have it tough, don't you? Scene didn't just accept the president's criticism, he added false claims of his own. Normally, I might have stayed silent, but today was different. Excuse me, our house is always clean, I interjected. Maybe you don't see it because you're off on sales visits, spending time at the president's daughter's house. The reaction was immediate. The employees and Scene's parents began murmuring. The president looked surprised, his eyes wide with disbelief. What are you talking about? Scene stammered, clearly flustered. Without hesitation, I spread out photos and documents on a nearby table. Scene's panic was evident as he saw the decisive evidence of his infidelity. About 2 months before this confrontation, I had hired a detective agency to gather proof of his affair. I was determined to expose him, and feeling overwhelmed by what I could do alone, I enlisted professional help. The detective provided various pieces of evidence, photos of Scene walking arm in arm with a woman I didn't recognize, entering a vacation hotel with her, and going into a love nest that appeared to be her home. This woman turned out to be the president's daughter, the daughter of the president of the company Scene worked for. It was unclear how they met, but Scene frequently visited her house, suggesting a close relationship that seemed to predate our current issues. The detective noted that while further investigation was possible, his behavioral patterns were consistent, making it unlikely we find more significant evidence. Seeing these photos was a shock that dwarfed even the discovery of lipstick on Scene's suit. My anger and disappointment grew, knowing that Scene's deceit was far more extensive than I had initially feared. Hearing Scene's dismissive response, I decided to end the investigation. The next step was clear. Divorce. I couldn't continue living under the same roof as him. My heart was filled with nothing but anger. By then, I had already heard from Scene about the barbecue event. Given his behavior, I was certain he was spreading false rumors about me at work. I resolved to use the barbecue as an opportunity to reveal his deceit. I wasn't entirely sure if my plan would work, and I didn't have solid proof of what Scene was saying about me at the company. But reality unfolded exactly as I had imagined. Hey Helen, what are these photos? And why is there a picture of me with the president's daughter? Scene's face turned pale as he saw the evidence. Still trying to lie in this situation, I countered. The evidence is clear. I turned to the president. Sir, the woman in this photo is your daughter, correct? Can you confirm that? The president hesitated as he looked at the photo. In a low voice, he finally admitted, yes, that's my daughter. Scene. Where did you meet my daughter? I demanded. The atmosphere, which had been friendly moments before, became tense. Scene, clearly flustered, tried to avoid the question. The president's pressure was evident, and eventually, Scene began to explain. He said he had first met the president's daughter in the company parking lot. She had come to the company on an errand, and he happened to strike up a conversation with her. Despite knowing Scene was married, the president's daughter was flattered by his attention and continued their relationship. Hearing this, I resolved to demand compensation for the emotional distress I had endured, even though she was the president's daughter. Scene was left completely crestfallen. I apologize, the daughter has her share of the blame for not refusing his advances, the president said, his voice heavy with frustration. But this situation wouldn't have occurred if you hadn't approached her. We'll discuss this further when you come to work tomorrow. Just come to my office first. Scene turned to me, desperation in his eyes. Helen, could you please forgive me? This will affect my job. Forgive you? I shot back, incredulous. Think about everything you've done. You've lied about me to the company and your parents. You've painted me as sloppy and incompetent. How can you expect forgiveness after all that? My mother-in-law, who had been listening in shock, couldn't hold back. Helen, is everything Scene has been saying true? We've heard that you're lazy and do nothing but lounge around every day. Is that true? No, I said firmly. I've been cleaning and cooking every day. Scene has complained about everything. You might not have believed me before, but look around now. No one here is supporting Scene. The president and other employees, having witnessed the truth, began to apologize. I'm sorry, Helen, the president said. I should have taken your words seriously. My in-laws, bowing their heads in apology, followed suit. The apologies were heartfelt but temporary. I could have fully forgive them on the spot. Their behavior had deeply insulted me, and it wasn't something I could easily overlook. My anger, however, was primarily directed at Scene. I've already consulted with a lawyer, I said resolutely. I'm filing for divorce. A divorce? Why? Why do you need more reasons? Scene pleaded, his face turning ashen. No one showed him any sympathy. The following day, Scene and I went to the lawyer's office. The president's daughter was there with the president, and all the involved parties gathered for a formal discussion. As everything was set up, the lawyer began the proceedings. Scene looked dismayed, while the president's daughter wore an expression of shock. What is this? She asked. These are photos from a detective agency I hired, I explained. I suspected Scene was cheating because of the perfume smell on his suit and the lipstick marks. How could I not suspect? The president listened and nodded in understanding. Helen is seeking a divorce, asset division from Scene, and compensation for mental distress. The president's daughter, stunned, replied sharply, compensation. I've done nothing wrong. The president's daughter, clearly flustered, struggled to defend herself. I didn't do anything wrong, she said, her voice lacking conviction. The president, visibly displeased, responded sharply, you knew he was married. How can you claim no fault when you willingly engaged with him? Her response seemed immature and evasive, and she appeared unable to acknowledge her own mistakes. As Scene muttered about the divorce and asset division, the president admonished him, if you were truly remorseful, you wouldn't be making excuses. You need to face the reality of your situation. Scene hung his head in silence, clearly avoiding responsibility. I addressed him firmly, this is my final request as your wife. I need a divorce. Scene struggled with the decision, and my frustration grew. I made it clear, if you keep dragging this out, we'll end up in court. The mention of court seemed to shock Scene, and he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. The president's daughter, realizing there was no way out, agreed to the settlement, although she sought financial assistance from her father. The president, however, was resolute. I can't just give you money. You must take responsibility for your actions. Following the divorce, I received a lump sum settlement from both Scene and the president's daughter. With this money, I moved into a new apartment and began a fresh chapter in my life. After the divorce, Scene's parents and the president offered formal apologies. I learned that Scene had been dismissed from his job, largely due to the president's outrage over the affair, though officially it was due to poor conduct. The president's daughter had severed ties with him, and it was clear she wanted nothing further to do with him. Scene's downfall was complete, losing his job, his lover, and his family. Reflecting on the situation, I felt a deep sense of relief that I had exposed the truth. If I had stayed in the marriage, Scene's behavior would have continued to deteriorate, and false rumors about me would have persisted. Now, living comfortably in my new apartment, I focus on my own happiness. I work at a local variety store surrounded by things I love and feel content with my life. Sometimes, I wonder if I should have pursued the divorce sooner, but I believe waiting for the right moment was the best decision. Moving forward, I'm committed to living a life unburdened by others' influence. My name is Milline, and I'm 38 years old. I married my husband, Kenneth, who is 4 years older than me, 8 years ago. My life took a dramatic turn when my beloved father passed away due to illness, leaving me with a substantial inheritance. I used this fortune to purchase a new house, which I adore. The scent of fresh wood brings me comfort. I often think that my father would be pleased to see this new home. Our old house, where my father lived alone after my marriage and my mother's passing, was just a 15-minute walk from our apartment. Following my father's fall a few years ago, he passed away recently. With the inheritance, I decided to demolish the old family home and build a new one. I've always believed that even though the old house is gone, the happy memories will remain in our hearts. Kenneth often echoed my father's words about building a new home as a way to start afresh. At first, I thought Kenneth was just trying to cheer me up, but it soon became clear that this wasn't the case. Kenneth, I need you to fill out the divorce papers and submit them to the appropriate place. Divorce papers? What do you mean? I asked, bewildered. Yes, exactly that. We're getting divorced. I want you to submit the divorce papers. This is not a joke. I never intended to live with you in this house. This new home, built with your father's inheritance, is meant for my mistress. She and I will be living here together. His words were astonishing. Mistress, you've been cheating on me. Yes, if I had met her before I met you, I wouldn't have married you. She's different, cute, kind, and genuinely loves me. We've been together for about 6 months. She approached me knowing I was married, but she didn't mind. She's happy just being with me and says the sweetest things. I should never have married someone as serious and uptight as you. Coming home to you was never enjoyable. He continued, I've decided to take this house as alimony. After 8 years of marriage without children, what benefit is there in staying married to you? I was overwhelmed and sought comfort from Kenneth, only to be met with unexpected blame. You're acting like a victim, but this is all your fault. If you had fulfilled your role, no one would stray. It's your responsibility that men are drawn to other women. You're to blame for the affair, the divorce, and losing the new house. It's wrong to play the victim or to resent me for this, he asserted. He claimed his infidelity was my fault and then handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked, puzzled. It's your alimony. I don't want any hassle later, so I'm giving it to you now. Be thankful. Inside the envelope was $1,000. As he took the new house, built with my father's inheritance, to live with his mistress, he tossed me the money. I calmly returned the envelope. Fine, I accept the divorce. If you don't love me, there's no point in staying married. I don't need the money. He seemed taken aback by how easily I accepted the divorce. Well, if you say so. Just don't ask for it back later. Kenneth packed his things and left a few days later, taking the keys to the new house with him. However, shortly after, my now ex-husband frantically called me, clearly agitated. What did you do? The police came to the house, talking about warrants and charges of trespassing. What's going on? According to him, the police had arrived while he was with his mistress at the new house. Hello, we're the police. You understand why we're here, right? The police? What for? Well, this is your ex-wife's house. Entering with a stolen key is illegal, both theft and trespassing. You understand? Kenneth, shocked and bewildered, looked at his mistress, who was equally confused. What's going on? Isn't this your house? You said you wanted to show me. Be quiet and stay out of this. Sorry to interrupt your domestic dispute, but we have a warrant. Could we discuss this at the station? Caught between the police and his mistress, Kenneth called me in a panic. Why is this happening all of a sudden? What did you do? I haven't done much. I simply reported that my house keys were stolen and that strangers were in my home. It's only natural to call the police. I promptly filed the divorce papers, reverted to my maiden name, Milline Baker, and reported the situation to the police. This is my house. Didn't you agree to give it to us as alimony? Kenneth argued. I never agreed to that, I countered. It's convenient for you to twist things to fit your narrative. Are you joking? How can you think that house is yours? I'm the one on the house contract. I paid for it with my inheritance from my father. Plus, I own the land. But your father said it was for us, Kenneth protested. That was when you were my husband. Now we're divorced and strangers. Why would you think it's your land? My father had transferred the land rights to me when he fell ill to prevent any complications if something happened to him. He must have anticipated a situation like this. Maybe that's why he advised demolishing the old house and building a new one. Money can be taken easily, but a house, now that's different. Kenneth's calm demeanor suddenly made sense. So you were planning this all along? I did nothing. You misunderstood everything and left. It was almost amusing watching you walk away, clueless. Too bad you were about to be happy with your mistress. Stop being ridiculous. You blamed me for the affair, the divorce, and losing the house. How does it feel now, stuck between your girlfriend and the police? Kenneth could only groan in response. Hating me is misplaced. This situation is entirely your fault. Ever heard of you reap what you sow? This is what you deserve. As soon as I said this, Kenneth exploded in rage on the phone, shouting accusations. Then suddenly, his voice faded. Excuse me, are you Mr. Smith's ex-wife? He's causing a disturbance at your house. Could we have a word, please? It seemed a police officer had taken over the call. I explained the situation to the officer, who sympathetically acknowledged how tough it must have been. Later, Kenneth and his mistress were taken to the station. Kenneth continued to insist that the house was given to him by his ex-wife and that it wasn't trespassing. His mistress, genuinely surprised, stated that she had no knowledge of trespassing. Kenneth claimed he had evidence to support his case and presented it at the station. Ultimately, the mistress's statement was deemed credible, and she was released with a warning. Kenneth, however, was found guilty of theft and trespassing and was fined. The issue now was that Kenneth had named me as his guarantor upon his release, likely because he didn't want his strict parents to know. The officer, clearly exasperated, informed me of the situation. Why should I be his guarantor? We're divorced and strangers now, I replied firmly. I have no connection with Mr. Smith anymore, so I refuse. You say he has no one else to turn to, but his parents live nearby. Please contact them. The officer relayed this to Kenneth, who was evidently frustrated. His parents were already aware of our divorce due to his infidelity, but they were unaware of his attempt to take the new house. The police call had informed them of the entire situation. Reluctantly, I visited Kenneth's parents' house after they requested more details. I knocked on the door and apologized. I'm sorry I couldn't explain the situation earlier. No need to apologize, his mother replied. It's all my foolish son's fault. But did you know about this? No, about what? I asked. Well, my son is here with his mistress, a much younger woman. We let them in to talk, but I'm not sure what he's thinking. To my surprise, Kenneth had brought his mistress into the living room. The scene was as described: Kenneth, the young woman, and my stern-looking father-in-law, Tom. Tom, it's been a while. I'm sorry for the delay, I said. Milan, thanks for coming. I apologize for calling you after the divorce, but I've heard Kenneth's side of the story. However, I can't fully trust someone who's been arrested for trespassing. Can you tell me your side? I recounted everything as requested. Throughout my explanation, Kenneth and his mistress kept their heads bowed, avoiding eye contact. What were you thinking, trying to take Milan's new house? Are you insane? Kenneth's father demanded. It's not that simple, Kenneth interjected. We resolved this between us. Resolved? How is that possible? Tom retorted. Your story is completely different from hers. Apparently, Kenneth spun his own version before I arrived. What were you told? I asked. Kenneth's father said he claimed you willingly transferred the house to him, then changed your story and reported him, leading to his wrongful arrest. Really? He said that. I was incredulous. It's true that when we discussed the house, I didn't object. But that doesn't mean I agreed to transfer ownership. To suddenly claim the house as yours and report it, it's beyond comprehension. I'm so sorry, Milan, for having such a son, Kenneth's mother said. What are you saying, Mom? I'm telling the truth. Milan wasn't agreeing. She was too stunned to speak. How could you misunderstand and still claim to be her husband? I nodded in agreement with Tom. Despite everything, Kenneth continued to make excuses. Anyway, you never mentioned owning the land. If I'd known, I wouldn't have done this. If I had told you, you'd have found another excuse to do the same thing, I replied. How can you say that? Were you spending a lot on her? Kenneth asked, gesturing towards his mistress. No, why would you think that? I responded. Right after our divorce, I happened to run into one of your colleagues. When I mentioned the divorce, I received some shocking information that left me reeling. Figures, Kenneth's colleague said, looking uncomfortable. No offense, but I thought it might happen. What do you mean? Didn't he tell you? I asked. The colleague shifted uncomfortably before spilling everything. I should have mentioned this sooner, but I wasn't in a position to tell you. Kenneth has been bragging about his mistress, a woman 20 years younger. He was showing off, buying her expensive bags and jewelry. He said he didn't know how to contact you to inform you. He's been very open about his plans. The colleague continued. Kenneth even mentioned a decisive conversation he had. He said he was planning to divorce you to marry his mistress. Apparently, her father passed away, and they're building a new house with the inheritance. Kenneth planned to claim the house in the divorce. He said, once the house is built, I'll divorce Meline and somehow claim it. No matter the opposition, I'll get it, and then my young new wife and I will live in the big house. Kenneth had been showering his mistress with gifts for some time, it seemed. The house built with my father's inheritance was intended as a grand gesture to propose to her. I've heard everything. Do you still insist you did nothing wrong? I asked, sweating with frustration. Kenneth stammered. Well, yes, I bought her gifts. So what? I used my own money and gave Meline her living expenses. She's not my destined partner. This woman is. I brought her here today to announce our marriage. Are you out of your mind? His parents exclaimed in shock. The most surprising response came from the mistress. Marry you? Did I ever say that? We're not even dating. What do you mean? Kenneth asked, bewildered. Exactly that, she replied. I'm not in a relationship with him. I only approached him for a sugar daddy arrangement. I told you from the start that I was looking for someone for that kind of arrangement, and even married men were acceptable. You agreed to it initially, but now? What are you talking about? That's creepy, the mistress said. Kenneth went pale at this revelation, unable to speak. I asked, so why did you come here with him today? The mistress explained, I came to ask for more time to pay the alimony. I knew he was married, so it's an affair, and I'm prepared to pay the alimony. But I'm still a student. A student. How old are you? Tom, Kenneth's father, interjected, looking bewildered. I'm 22. I lost my parents early and have been doing sugar dating to pay for college. I sold all the gifts for living expenses, so I don't have savings. I can show you my bank account. I've just secured a job and can start paying alimony from my salary. So, you came here to ask me to wait for the alimony? I asked. Yes, that's right, she confirmed. Kenneth, who had been listening in silence, erupted in anger. Didn't you hear her? Unfortunately, she never intended to marry or even date you. But that's separate from the alimony you owe. And what about saying you wanted a house? The mistress responded, I meant I'd want a house someday when I marry. It wasn't about marrying you. What? Kenneth exclaimed. I was suddenly taken to that house, thinking it was yours. Then the police came, and I learned it was actually your wife's. She bowed deeply to me, indicating that all of this was due to Kenneth's misunderstandings. Kenneth stood dazed, clearly in shock. All right, I said, if you promise to pay the alimony properly, I'll wait for the payment. But promise me no more sugar dating. It might not end simply next time. I promise I'll never do it again, she said earnestly. I turned to Kenneth. Expect a claim for alimony from me without delay. Alimony? What are you talking about? Kenneth asked, taken aback and not expecting to pay alimony himself. You said you didn't need alimony when you returned the money, I reminded him. I gave you $1,000 and now you're asking for more? That's not what we agreed on, Kenneth protested. I don't recall any agreement, I said. You returned the $1,000 I gave you saying you didn't need it. What I meant was that I didn't need such a trivial amount for alimony. Do you have any idea how much alimony for infidelity is? It's $11,000, I replied, and you're also at fault for not having children in the 8 years we were married. At that moment, a loud slap echoed through the room. Someone asked, What are you doing, Kenneth? He held his cheek, clearly stunned by the impact. I asked, Are you serious? Do you really think her inability to have children is her fault? Enough with your jokes, Dad, Kenneth's father interrupted. Don't tell me you're blaming Malign for your affair too. Well, that's how it is, Kenneth said. I should have never married her. It's like fraud. How could you think that? I challenged. Your parents wanted grandchildren. If she couldn't get pregnant, they thought it was better to split up. That's why I chose her. If you truly believe that, Kenneth's father said, then we must have raised you wrong. It took your mother 10 years to conceive you. She was heartbroken hearing about others having children quickly and went through intense treatments until you were born. Did you think pregnancy is solely the woman's responsibility? Is that why you could cheat so easily? If you really cared about her, you wouldn't have done what you did. This isn't Malign's fault, Kenneth's father continued. It's all due to your thoughts and actions. I was learning this for the first time too. Kenneth's mother, Jane, had struggled for 10 years to have him. Tears streamed down her face as she silently listened. Carly, Tom said, leave this house now. Why? Kenneth asked, bewildered. You're a long-awaited son. I can't bear to look at you now, Tom said. Don't come back until you truly understand your mistakes. Where should I go? Kenneth asked. Back to our apartment. That apartment has already been canceled, I said. With the new house, there was no need to keep it. I canceled it right after reporting to the police. There's no place for you to return. Kenneth was shocked to realize he had nowhere to go. In frustration, he started blaming his mistress. It's your fault. All the money I spent, and now you say you never intended to marry me. It's fraud. She remained calm and replied, I was clear about it being a sugar relationship from the start. I never asked for money or gifts. If you want to sue me, go ahead, but I have proof of our arrangement. And don't forget the alimony, I said. Kenneth seemed flustered. Wait, please wait. I contacted his parents with her and then left their house. Later, I hired a lawyer and sent a demand letter for the alimony. I didn't send it to his parents' house, knowing he no longer lived there. Why is it being sent here? Kenneth's workplace receptionist asked as she looked at the letter. It's possible to send such documents to both residential and employment addresses, I explained. This is regarding the alimony. Is that what this is about? She asked, noticing Kenneth's pale face. You look so shaken. Didn't you inform him? I did, I confirmed. I just told the truth. No one asked me to keep quiet. It's his own doing. The arrival of the demand letter at Kenneth's workplace spread news about his actions, including his sugar dating and the subsequent loss of everything. Overcome with embarrassment, Kenneth couldn't handle the gossip and resigned, claiming he was leaving on his own terms. His troubles didn't end there. He sought free legal advice, claiming he was a victim of marriage fraud. The response was discouraging. We see cases like this, but with the evidence you provided, it's not considered fraud. You agreed that it was a sugar relationship from the start, the advisor said. If you developed feelings later, that was one-sided. We won't stop you from suing, but it's likely a waste of money. Kenneth decided not to pursue the lawsuit based on this advice. Eventually, he came to me, defeated. I don't know what I was thinking. I overlooked how important you were even after 8 years together. I promise this time, I'll make you happy and won't be distracted by anyone else, he pleaded. Naturally, his plea over the phone didn't sway me. My response was resolute. I refuse. Why? After all this begging, I realized over these 8 years that you are a terrible person. You try to blame everything on me and take what's mine, then shamelessly come back after losing it all. What benefit would there be for me to reunite with someone so selfish? Kenneth protested. You don't have to put it that way. You once said the same things to me. Anyway, never contact me again, I said firmly, though given your situation, I doubt you can. I hung up, deleted all his contact information, and changed my phone number. However, a few days later, something unexpected happened. Your ex-husband came to the house the other day, one of the neighbors said. We had to chase him away after he caused a commotion. What was he thinking? I asked, astonished. The neighborhood ladies who were aware of the situation pretended to call the police to drive him away. Since then, I haven't seen him. I don't know where he is or what he's doing, but I'm confident he isn't leading a happy life. This afternoon, my husband casually mentioned that my mom is moving in and instructed me to get all my things out of the room and into the yard before then. I was taken aback, sitting on the couch reading the newspaper, and nearly dropped a plate while doing the dishes in the kitchen. His remark was so unexpected and nonchalant that I was left dumbfounded. Confused, I asked him to clarify. What do you mean? He looked at me with a hint of frustration, gripping the newspaper tighter. Don't you get it? Let me make it simple for you. My mom is moving in. We need the room you're using because she'll need it. So move your stuff to the yard. I was stunned. He had never mentioned this before, and I wished he had at least discussed it with me beforehand. Still, I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "Okay, I'll move everything out." "Good," he replied. "Make sure you do it quickly. Now you'll have a chance to learn some housekeeping skills for Mom." I was speechless. I knew he was close to his mother, but this felt like an extreme measure. I must have been too shocked to respond. It was clear he had asked her to move in without prior notice, and the suddenness of it all left me feeling helpless. With a forced smile, I agreed. "Got it, I'll get everything out." As soon as the conversation ended, I pulled out my smartphone and made a call. I wasn't going to let this go unaddressed. My husband looked at me, puzzled. "Who are you calling?" he asked, but I didn't bother explaining. "Hey, I'm back," I heard a voice call out as soon as my husband Tom returned from work. Tom and I had been married for 2 years. We met shortly after I graduated college and started working for an apparel company, and we quickly fell in love and married. "Welcome home," I greeted him, rushing from the living room to the entrance. "How was your day? What about dinner?" It was a routine I followed to avoid upsetting my domineering husband. "I'm starving. Let's eat first," he said, and I hurried to prepare dinner. "Grilled fish tonight. Looks delicious. Let's eat while it's still hot." We had a pleasant dinner and conversation, but things shifted when I brought up a thought I'd been having. I've been thinking about going back to work soon. We don't have kids yet, and our savings are dwindling. Tom's calm demeanor changed instantly. "Why would you want that?" he asked sharply. "I just think it might help if we increase the household budget a little. That way, I wouldn't need to work," I explained. "Are you saying my income isn't enough?" he snapped. "That's not what I meant at all," I defended. "I'm just suggesting that if the budget were slightly better, I wouldn't need to go back to work." Tom responded curtly, "I give you $250 every month. Isn't that enough?" I had always intended to continue working, but the conversation took a turn I hadn't anticipated. Before we got married, I had made it clear to my husband that I wanted to have children. He didn't agree, preferring that I focus on staying home. The monthly allowance he provided was just $250, which was unrealistic even though we lived in a house inherited from my late grandfather with no mortgage. $250 a month for 2 people was barely enough to cover the basics. I couldn't help but blurt out my frustration. "We can't live on that." Instantly, I clamped my hand over my mouth. But the damage was done. He reacted with anger, shouting, "Why can't you make it work? Where is all that money going? My mom said she could manage on that much." His reaction was fueled by a sense of obligation to his mother. After losing his father in a traffic accident during middle school, he had been raised by her, and it seemed he had developed a deep reliance on her opinions. To him, her word was law, and he expected me to follow it as well. I, too, had lost a parent, my father, when I was in high school, and had been raised by a single mother. But I knew that not all of her opinions were correct. I felt my appetite vanish as I said, "I'm going to bed," and watched him storm off to his room, leaving his meal untouched. The loud footsteps in the hallway seemed deliberately forceful. I questioned myself, wondering why I had married this man. Others might say I should leave him, but despite everything, I still loved him. He was usually a decent person, and I wished he would focus on our relationship rather than his mother. I silently hoped that one day he would turn away from his mother's influence and truly connect with me. With a heavy heart, I began cleaning up dinner, clinging to a faint hope. A few months later, an incident occurred that would irreparably damage our relationship. At dinner, he suddenly announced, "My mother is coming over next Saturday. Make sure you clean up properly." I was caught off guard and replied, "I haven't seen your mother in a while, so I'm a bit nervous." "She's perfect, so just remember that," he said dismissively. I disliked my mother-in-law, and his casual tone only added to my frustration. I hadn't seen her since our wedding, and her condescending behavior and the dissatisfaction she expressed towards me were unforgettable. I recalled her words when I first visited their home for the wedding introduction. "So, you're the one engaged to my son? You seem quite dull. Are you sure you're suitable to marry him?" Back then, I managed to laugh it off, but hearing such a comment directly from her, someone I had just met, left a lasting scar on my heart. I never imagined that such a mother-in-law would come to my house. My husband seemed excited about her visit, cheerfully enjoying dinner while I was overcome with anxiety. My hands were trembling, and I nearly dropped my chopsticks. I was terrified of meeting her, but refusing to meet her would only displease my husband. He soon noticed my unease. "Hey, you okay? You look pale. Are you feeling sick?" I considered saying no, to refuse the meeting with my mother-in-law, but the words that came out were not what I felt. "No, I'm fine really. I'm looking forward to her visit," I lied, not wanting to upset him. He seemed relieved. "You're excited too, right?" "Yeah, I'm excited," I replied, though inside, I was battling my frustration at my own weakness. I forced a smile to avoid his anger and finished dinner. "Thanks for the meal. I'm going to take a bath and sleep," I said. "Okay, good night." I didn't want to think about the impending visit and went to bed early. Yet when I woke up the next morning, I still felt unsettled. As Saturday approached, my health seemed to deteriorate. I never anticipated that meeting her would affect me so deeply. When the day finally arrived, my husband went to pick up his mother, and I waited nervously at home, having cleaned the house meticulously. The doorbell rang in the quiet room, and I jumped up. "She's here," I thought, hurrying to the door. As I opened it, I was greeted with, "Yasmin, it's been a while." "Yes, it has been a while," I managed to reply. But as soon as I faced my mother-in-law, my heart began to pound, and I could feel a tightness in my chest. I was frozen, standing like a statue, until my husband, who had followed behind, prompted me. "What are you doing, Yasmin? If you stand there, my mother can't get in. Please let her in." "Oh, sorry," I stammered, snapping back to reality. "Please, come in." I finally led my mother-in-law inside, my heart racing with anxiety about what she might say. The hallway leading to the living room, though short, felt endless. To my surprise, she didn't make any harsh comments as she followed me into the living room. It was cleaner than I had expected, and I thought, maybe I'll avoid any harsh remarks after all. The conversation that followed was more subdued than I anticipated. About 3 hours into her visit, the topic of my husband came up. "You know," she said, "I was surprised you asked Tom to give you more for living expenses." "I didn't ask for more," I corrected. "I just mentioned that I needed a bit extra. There's a difference." Her eyes shifted towards Tom for confirmation. "That's not what Tom told me," she said, clearly seeking his support. We had indeed discussed the issue a few months ago, but I had never demanded anything. "Really, Mom, it's terrible," Tom interjected. "I've been giving her money every month. I can't believe this." His words hit me like a shockwave. Was he trying to curry favor with his mother? "Tom says the same," she continued. "You don't even have a mortgage. How much are you getting for living expenses?" $250 a month, I said. "Even you should understand that's not enough. You've managed a household budget and raised children yourself. You know how difficult it is to live on such a small amount." I was confident she would understand, but her reaction was unexpected. $250? You're getting that much and still asking for more? Where is all the money going?" "Food and daily necessities," I explained. "I don't waste money. The utility bills alone are more than $250, so I've been using my savings." But like Tom, my mother-in-law wasn't sympathetic. "You could manage with a bit more savings. You need to be more resourceful. Ideally, I'd be there to guide you on the right way." The suggestion was clear. Living with her was out of the question. I responded with a forced smile. "Maybe you're right. I'll try to be more resourceful." Tom looked oddly pleased. "Mom's saying this, so why not live together? She can teach you how to manage finances." No way, I thought. I can't handle any more stress. I'm already walking on eggshells around Tom, and adding my mother-in-law into the mix would be unbearable. I'd rather not. I clearly expressed my refusal to my husband, but his annoyance was evident. "What, you're rejecting my suggestion? That's exactly what's wrong with you. Mom's just trying to be kind. Let's drop this, Mom," he said, turning to her. "Talking to her is pointless. Let's go." He stood up, and together with my mother-in-law, they left the living room. Once they were gone, I felt drained and overwhelmed. My husband, a stable salaried worker earning around $2,000 a month, shouldn't find a slight increase in living expenses problematic. Why was he so reluctant? There had to be a reason. Feeling unwell, I decided to take a nap. When I awoke, it was already deep into the night. "What time is it?" I wondered, seeing that it was past midnight. I must have slept for hours. My husband had returned and was already asleep in the bedroom, perhaps not waking me out of consideration. My body ached from sleeping on the couch, and I realized it was pointless to do anything at this hour. I crawled into bed and closed my eyes again. The next morning, my husband's announcement was unbelievable. "Mom's moving in this afternoon. By then, get all your stuff out in the yard," he said casually while reading the newspaper on the couch. I was in the kitchen doing dishes after breakfast when I accidentally dropped a plate, which shattered loudly. "Move everything out into the yard?" I asked, bewildered. I approached him for clarification. "Ha! What do you mean?" I inquired, confused. He looked at me with irritation, ripping the newspaper tightly. "You don't get it. I'll say it again, slowly for your benefit. My mother is moving into this house. Got it? It's an absurd idea, but you need to understand." My mind struggled to process the situation. He had never mentioned this before. I wished he had discussed it with me. Despite my shock, I listened without arguing. "She needs a spare room," he continued. "That's why we're using your room. If there's stuff in the way, just put it all out in the yard. Lucky you. Now you can learn housekeeping from her." I was left speechless. I knew my husband had a strong attachment to his mother, but this was crossing the line. It seemed clear that he must have already discussed living together with her when he returned yesterday. I was stunned by the sudden decision for his mother to move in. Nothing else seemed to matter anymore. "Fine, I'll put everything out," I said, barely containing my frustration. "Got it. Make sure you do it right." The moment our conversation ended, I pulled out my phone and made a call. I wasn't going to let this go without a response. My husband looked at me, puzzled. "Who are you calling?" he asked, but I ignored him. I meant what I said. I would move everything out, but I didn't want to live with a mama's boy any longer. If his mother was that important, they could be together. My anger had turned into a deep resentment. "Yes, that's right, including the land." "Yes, please," I continued, speaking to the real estate agent. My husband's voice grew louder and more impatient as he shouted, "Are you even listening? Stop making calls on your own." I continued talking, undisturbed. This house, inherited from my grandfather, was now my property, and I had the right to do whatever I wished with it. If my husband and mother-in-law were making unilateral decisions, so could I. After ending the call, I finally turned to my husband. "Stop it. You're being so noisy. Can't you see I'm on the phone? It's incredibly rude." "What kind of way is that to talk to your husband?" he snapped back, clearly annoyed. "I can't stand this any longer," I retorted. "You act so superior, but you don't even contribute properly to our living expenses. How are you any better? You make nearly $2,000 a month but only give me $250. Where is the rest of the money going? Are you having an affair or something?" His face turned red with rage. He slammed the newspaper onto the floor and grabbed me by the collar. "An affair? Don't joke about that. Why would you accuse me of that when I'm working hard every day?" Despite his anger, I remained calm. "Then why don't you contribute more to our household? If you're not doing anything wrong, there's no reason you can't. I'm not asking for all your salary, nor have I restricted your allowance." His tone softened slightly. "Well, yes, but men have their own social obligations," he said, still defensive. "I see, so you expect me to handle everything at home while you enjoy yourself outside. I'm just a convenient housekeeper to you." His grip on my collar loosened, indicating I had hit a nerve. He attempted to change the subject, but it was clear. "Anyway, my mother will be moving in today. I might increase the living expenses a bit," he said, heading back to the living room. I called after him. "That's fine, but I'm not planning to live together. If you really want to live here with your mother, I'll leave." He turned back, clearly surprised. I couldn't imagine continuing to live with him and my mother-in-law under these circumstances. Exhausted from this life, I kept my gaze cold. He noticed and approached me again. "Are you really going to leave?" "Of course, I'm leaving right away," I replied firmly. "Just wait a moment." I went to my room and returned with copies of the petition for divorce, marriage certificate, and summons from the court. I handed them to him as he slumped on the sofa. "Here, look at these. Are you sure about this? Don't come back regretting it." "I have no regrets," I said, my voice steady. "Just read it carefully and respond to the court. My determination is firm. I just want to cut ties with this mama's boy as quickly as possible. From now on, I'll leave everything to my lawyer." "Well, thank you for everything," I added, preparing to leave with my belongings. There's no alimony, right? I haven't done anything wrong, I asked, making sure. Sure, that works for me, he replied, relieved. To avoid any trouble later, let's agree in writing not to divide any assets. His face softened, clearly relieved not to have to pay alimony. We signed an agreement to forgo any alimony and not to divide any property. This formalized the end of our marriage. An hour later, just as I was about to leave with my packed belongings, my mother-in-law arrived. "Where are you going with all that luggage?" she asked. "I'm leaving this house," I said. "Please discuss the details with Tom." "I wish you both happiness," I said with a smile, feeling a sense of liberation. The prospect of never seeing them again made my heart lighter. The world outside seemed brighter than ever. It had been a long time since I felt this clear-headed. First, I went to see my lawyer to discuss the next steps, then visited a real estate agent to arrange a new flat. I couldn't move in immediately, so I spent the week in a hotel. I hadn't heard from my ex-husband, and I figured he and his mother were probably settling into their new routine. That was until he called. "Speak of the devil," I muttered, answering the phone. He sounded furious. "What's this about an eviction notice?" he shouted. "Calm down. What's happened?" I replied, brushing my teeth in the bathroom. I set the phone down to rinse my mouth, but his angry voice still reached me faintly. "What are you doing? This isn't a joke," he snapped. I picked up the phone again and moved to the bedroom. "You never change, always so angry," I said, but let it go. "Never mind that. Answer me," he demanded. "All right, the eviction notice. The house you and your mother are living in no longer belongs to anyone. That's probably why you received it," I explained. He seemed bewildered. "You don't understand, so we'll explain again," I said firmly. "I hold the rights to that house. It's now owned by the real estate company and is going to be sold." "No way. That's so unfair. You didn't tell me about something this important," he yelled, shocked and enraged. "You didn't share anything significant with me either. You decided to live with your mother without consulting me. It's too late now. If you don't hurry up with the move-out process, you'll be reported," I said coldly. "That house was our joint property. You can't just sell it like that. It's invalid. Cancel it," he protested. "Are you stupid? Did you forget we both signed an agreement that there would be no division of assets? That house was mine from the start, and I can do whatever I want with it," I said, pushing him away. His reaction confirmed he had completely forgotten the terms of the contract. His disregard for everything related to me had worn me down. I felt a wave of disappointment as I tried to end the call. "Are we done? Do you understand now? This is the last time I'm discussing this," I said, preparing to hang up. "Hey, wait, we have nowhere to go if we get kicked out suddenly," he exclaimed. "That's not my problem. You've been stingy all this time, so you must have plenty of money. Figure it out. Why don't you rent a flat or a house?" I responded coldly before ending the call. His once assertive tone faltered, and he began stumbling over his words. "I don't have any money. I don't have any savings. I can't believe it. How can an adult have no savings at all? How unplanned can he be?" My indignation flared. If he'd been in front of me, I might have struck him. "Really hopeless," I muttered, shaking my head. "I was right to divorce you. You're old enough to have savings, yet you contributed nothing to living expenses and just squandered money. There's no way I'm helping you." His pleading only steeled my resolve. "Please, just a little bit," he started. "Why don't you ask your mother? That's a good idea. So goodbye, mama's boy. Don't ever contact me again." I ended the call with finality and immediately blocked his number. Why should I help someone like him? If he seriously thought he'd get aid from me, he was mistaken. After everything was settled, I lay down on the soft bed of my new place, gazed at the ceiling, and proudly gave it the middle finger. 2 weeks later, I moved into my new flat. It's smaller than my old house, but it's clean and I feel quite content. My ex-husband and his mother eventually left the house. The real estate agent informed me they resisted initially but vacated when threatened with police involvement. They had underestimated me even after the divorce. I resumed my old job and the warm welcome from my colleagues was heartening. One day, a colleague invited me to lunch and asked, "Is it okay if I ask why you got divorced?" "Well, it's complicated," I said. "Let's talk about it over drinks sometime. But I do have a question. I haven't seen Tom around lately. What happened?" "Oh right, you don't know," my colleague said, their expression changing. Tom officially resigned due to distress, but the truth is, he was fired for embezzling company funds. It happened around the time you left. Embezzlement? I was stunned. How much did he embezzle? About $220,000, my colleague replied. I was so shocked I stood up, raising my voice. The other diners turned to look at us. Keep it down, my colleague whispered. Sorry, but that's a huge amount. Didn't he get caught? The boss wanted to handle it quietly, they explained. Tom didn't go to the police, but if he doesn't repay the money soon, he might be reported. Those are just rumors, though. The full story isn't clear. As I processed the news, I realized it wasn't entirely surprising given his character. Always concerned with appearances and squandering money on socializing, his downfall was predictable. But it was no longer my concern. I'm still young, and I want to build a new life and find happiness with someone who truly cares for me. After talking with my colleague, my resolve to move forward only strengthened. I won't allow it, the father of the family declared angrily. This man is targeting our family. In the tense silence that followed as he caught his breath, the older brother spoke up. So what do you plan to do about my sister's engagement? It's over, of course. It's only natural, the father replied. I want you to have no further dealings with my son. The brother, remaining calm, responded, Let's consider the engagement with my sister as if it never existed. Is that acceptable to you? There's no need to stress over it. It's a waste of time. People don't understand their place. He added with a hint of curiosity, I'd really like to see the face of their parents. You probably see them often, don't you? The father looked puzzled, and the brother continued, My name is Tilly. I like it, though I don't know how it was chosen or who named me. By the time I became aware of myself, I rarely saw my parents. My father was an executive at a major electronics manufacturer, and my mother was a board member. They use a hotel near the company as a substitute for home, rarely returning to our actual house. My brother and I were left alone, almost abandoned, in a grand home that hid our situation from the neighborhood. He recalled, I remember a little girl my mother brought home when I was 5. Her name was Carol. She became my sister, but like us, she was left to fend for herself. At the time, it seemed normal, though looking back, it was far from it. My brother, only 7, took on the responsibility of caring for us. Our mother made occasional appearances for appearances' sake, but we relied entirely on our brother. Tilly continued, Carol, who had excelled in school, was suddenly taken away by our parents. It was unexpected. My mother, impressed by Carol's beauty and intelligence, decided to raise her as the daughter of a wealthy family. Disappointed with my brother's poor academic performance, they planned to use Carol to find a competent successor. I later realized they were strategically selecting the successor. My brother's poor performance was due to his responsibilities at home, not a lack of ability. Thanks to him, we were able to go to school and play with friends normally. Yet our parents never recognized his sacrifices. Eventually, it was just my brother and me again. By the time I graduated from middle school, we received a notice that the enrollment fee for the private high school I intended to attend hadn't been paid. I have no intention of spending money on an incompetent child, my mother told my brother, and she stopped providing financial support shortly after. My brother, having anticipated this, immediately withdrew from his own high school and began homeschooling me. He started working at a company I had never heard of and used his earnings to cover my enrollment fee. From then on, he was my sole supporter. Determined to make the most of his sacrifice, I studied diligently and managed to earn a scholarship to university. Maintaining my grades was crucial to lessen the burden on my brother, so I balanced a busy schedule of part-time jobs and studies. My social life was minimal, but as I neared the end of my studies, I suddenly found myself with friends. Throughout school, I was serious about my studies, keeping meticulous notes to make the most of my limited time. Some classmates, recognizing the quality of my notes, began approaching me for help. I found it amusing and perplexing to see people who only appeared around finals asking to borrow my notes. They became so popular that they were often not returned, and tracking them down was a hassle. Often, I didn't even know who had them until I finally got the names, which were usually unfamiliar. As exams approached, a senior male student came searching for me. He had noticed an unfamiliar girl's name on the notes he borrowed from a friend and wanted to find out more. He introduced himself as Gary. I was surprised to see that Gary's name was different from those of my friends. With the finals approaching, I asked, "Are you okay?" "I usually study a lot, so I should be fine," he replied with a reassuring smile. "But it's nice to have the chance to review. Thank you." At that time, I didn't realize Gary was a popular senior among both genders and the son of an executive at a well-known company. "I'd be happy to borrow your notes again," he said, still smiling. His charm was undeniable, and even after learning about my background, he remained unchanged in his attitude toward me. It seemed that Gary liked me too. We began to greet each other during lectures and eventually started attending classes together. Our relationship grew, and we started dating. Despite being surrounded by people who flattered him due to his popularity, Gary was deeply concerned about the pressures of his parents' expectations and the envy that came with potential job offers through connections. I wasn't concerned with social appearances or pretenses, which seemed to give Gary some relief. Even though I was too busy to share my family situation with friends, I couldn't keep it hidden from Gary. He listened without pity and expressed a genuine desire to help whenever I was in trouble. His supportive nature made me fall for him all over again. After graduating, Gary joined his father's company as planned. The following year, I graduated and started working at a trading company. 2 years later, we got engaged. Gary arranged a dinner at a high-end restaurant for both families to meet. On the day of the meeting, my brother attended in place of my parents who couldn't make it. As soon as the meal began, Gary's father voiced his dissatisfaction. "What's the meaning of this?" he exclaimed. "The parents aren't here on such an important day. It's inexcusable and rude." Gary tried to mediate desperately, but I stopped him. It was important for me to explain that my brother had to work to support my education. Despite my heartfelt explanation, Gary's father remained unmoved. "You dropped out," he said harshly. "It's unthinkable for someone of such low status to join our family." He then took my brother's business card and tore it up, accusing us of being after their money. "I won't allow our family to be targeted by this man." Gary's father raged, his fury palpable. Amid his anger, my brother remained calm and during a brief silence, finally spoke up. "So what do you intend to do about the engagement with my sister?" "It's off, obviously. I want you to have nothing more to do with our son," Gary's father responded sharply. Both Gary and I were taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. My brother, however, remained unflustered. "There's no need to insist," he said coolly. "It's a complete waste of time. People don't understand their place. I'd really like to see the face of their parents." Gary's father looked puzzled. "You're always looking at them," my brother added calmly, which only confused Gary's father further. Regarding the broken engagement, my brother continued, "I'll convey it directly to Carol Smith. You've met Carol a few times, haven't you?" Gary's father was visibly shocked. "Carol? You mean Carol Smith? You're related to her?" "Yes," my brother revealed. "Carol is my sister." Gary's parents went pale at this revelation. "So you're the president's son who went missing?" Gary's father asked, astonished. My brother responded with a rueful smile. "That's how they know about me. The company where you and Gary work is run by our parents." Though this coincidence was surprising, it was not as shocking as discovering my connection to Carol after so many years. I was left wondering why my brother needed to relay something to her. He continued, "Tilly, I'm sorry. There were some things I had been keeping from you. I thought it wouldn't be a problem if the engagement went smoothly. Actually, there had been discussions about an engagement between Gary and Carol, which neither you nor Gary knew about." I was stunned by this revelation. My brother's story was not yet over. In fact, I've been in contact with Carol recently, but only for business-related reasons, he added. "I couldn't tell you about this earlier," my brother began. Carol mentioned that there was a marriage proposal. According to her, during their communications, she discussed the engagement, which was supposed to be with Gary, the man I was initially set to be engaged to. I had suspected that Gary had moved on to another woman, but upon Carol's investigation, it turned out that this engagement was something our parents were orchestrating behind the scenes. Carol had independently obtained this information, but there had been no formal notice of engagement from our parents. It appears Gary was not informed about this arrangement and likely did not know about the double booking. Thus, my brother and Carol concluded that the engagement between me and Gary made the most sense given the circumstances. So, under these circumstances, it's reasonable to call off the engagement between Gary and Carol, right? My brother said, offering a gentle smile to Gary's father. The matter with Carol should be irrelevant. It was decided among our parents after all. You were the one who mentioned calling off the engagement with my sister, or are you implying that Carol isn't my sister? No, that's not what I meant, Gary's father stammered. Let's have Carol inform our parents about this discussion. Since the engagement was arranged by them, it shouldn't matter if we, the children, choose to ignore it. As for the engagement between Gary and Tilly, I'll leave that decision to them, my brother said calmly. His tone was peaceful, but to Gary's father, it might have sounded like a threat. The shock on Gary's father's face grew as he processed the implications. You've repeatedly said you wanted to sever ties with my family, my brother continued. This means, I can only interpret this as a declaration that you don't want your company involved in the crucial line construction project I'm pushing forward, my brother said firmly. What line construction project? Gary's father asked, taken aback. He scrambled to pick up the torn business card of my brother. Upon seeing the company name on the card, his face turned even paler. After dropping out of public high school, my brother had started working at the core holding company of a trading and logistics group. This company was a key player in the group, focusing on internal operations and not widely known outside the industry. Through his hard work, my brother had caught the attention of the president, received a de facto handover from the outgoing president, and made significant contributions to the company's expansion. Currently, I support my brother at the same company using the language skills I acquired at university. The line construction project my brother mentioned involved prioritizing the supply of industrial materials, particularly those based on semiconductor materials, to our parent's company. Initially, the performance of the partner company was subpar, and while my brother might not have been personally invested in their proposal, he handled it with a professional approach. He always took his responsibilities seriously and considered all aspects, including Carol's role. It was unexpected for my brother to find Carol in a key position for this project. After graduating from university, Carol had joined our parents' company and risen to a business executive role, having excelled academically. When they reunited after a long time, Carol and my brother exchanged information and identified several issues. One of these was the overlapping engagements with Gary, which had already been resolved. The other issue was related to the pipeline construction project. For my brother, this project was crucial for proving the integrity and reliability of the supply chain. Before the founder and benefactor of the company retired, he aimed to ensure both peace of mind and continued business growth. To achieve this, he wanted to evaluate the operational capabilities of the partner companies and, more importantly, the qualities of their executives. Carol, who had grown into an intelligent and virtuous person, might have influenced our parents' approach to handling people or even contributed to their personal growth. My brother used his business acumen to objectively assess the situation, turning our engagement meeting into an opportunity for evaluation. Our parents showed little interest in the meeting and made no effort to get to know my partner. The true nature of Gary's father became clear through his behavior towards subordinates and the increasing gossip about him. The current character of his friends and our parents also became evident. Gary's father, realizing the gravity of the situation, said, "If that contract is lost, our company will forfeit $500 million in sales." He apologized profusely. My brother calmly responded, "As you wish, we shall not meet again." Before standing up, Gary took my hand and we rose to leave. Whether his whisper, "Let's leave them and get married," reached his paralyzed parents is uncertain. Afterward, Gary and I married, and he severed ties with his parents, leaving the company. He is now supporting my brother and contemplating starting his own business. I am committed to supporting him in this new venture. Our parents' company, burdened with debt, faced imminent bankruptcy. Executives resigned one after another, including Gary's father. Our parents, who had once claimed the honor of raising us, showed up at my brother's house. He repaid a small amount of child support and then cut off ties with them. I decided to follow his example. Surprisingly, our sister Carol took on the challenge of reviving the nearly bankrupt company. "I can't abandon the future of our employees," she declared with the resolve of a business executive. My brother and I pledged to support Carol with all our might. I am now living in the house where I grew up with Gary. My brother renovated it and gifted it to us. We are expecting our small family to grow soon, and I am determined not to neglect raising our child. Even though we hadn't seen each other for a month, Sean said nothing about my health. Instead, he simply demanded a divorce. "I want a divorce from a wife who neither does household chores nor works. Don't expect any share of the property," he said with a smirk. Jessica stood beside him, grinning and clinging to his arm. "All right, a divorce it is," I replied calmly. Scene looked surprised, but then he and Jessica exchanged smiles. Thankfully, Scene's thoughtless nature worked to my advantage, allowing my plan to proceed smoothly. After the divorce, I began executing my revenge plan against them. By the time it was complete, my health should have improved, and their regretful faces would be my victory. I'm Sophie, 47 years old, an illustrator and picture book author. Drawing has always been my passion. I have 2 childhood friends, Sean and Jessica, both very important to me. Sean is also my husband. It all started after high school when I was the only one who went to a different university. That's when Sean asked me out. I had always thought he had feelings for Jessica, so his confession took me by surprise. I was secretly in love with him, so I was overjoyed. Before starting our relationship, I consulted Jessica. She had always been somewhat of a troublemaker, often coveting what belonged to others and causing issues which worried her parents. Despite this, Sean and I tried to include her in our lives as much as possible. I married Sean at 25, but 4 years later, Jessica suddenly introduced her fiancé Matt. He was a well-mannered man who quickly became close with us. We spent holidays together, enjoying trips and discovering our favorite drinks. I thought our relationship was solid, but about 2 years after Jessica and Matt's marriage, things began to deteriorate. The trouble started when Jessica became pregnant. Sean and I had decided not to have children. We liked kids but preferred to focus on our hobbies, such as drinking and traveling. We admired families with children but were content without them. However, Sean's behavior changed dramatically after learning about Jessica's pregnancy. He quit smoking, which he had stubbornly refused to do for my sake, just because Jessica mentioned the smell. He even took paid leave to drive her to the hospital, clearly going beyond what a childhood friend would do. You know, if you stay too close to Jessica, Matt might feel uncomfortable. I warned him. "You're busy, right? It's terrible how indifferent you are, even when a pregnant friend needs help." He retorted, "I'm trying to help out. I do the shopping and run errands. I think accompanying Jessica to the gynecologist is a bit much, though." I argued, if she's scared, she should have Matt go with her. Going with her every time makes it seem like you're the child's father. "You're not going to be pregnant anytime soon, so what does it matter?" Sean dismissed my concerns. We rarely fought before, but since Jessica's pregnancy, our arguments increased. This tension continued after Jessica's delivery, with Sean spending more time with her and her child. When Maya turned 5, an incident occurred the night before her preschool graduation. Sean was rummaging through the bedroom closet. "What's wrong? Do you have a business dinner tomorrow?" I asked, noticing his suit thrown carelessly on the bed. His workplace had a casual dress code except for formal meetings. "No, I'm deciding what to wear for the graduation ceremony," he replied. "Wait, you're planning to attend Mia's graduation?" I protested loudly. "Matt can't make it, and Jessica asked me to come," he said. "That's just wrong," I protested, causing Sean's expression to sour. I was aware that Scene sometimes picked up Mia from preschool, and I had also helped out occasionally. That level of assistance was acceptable, but it seemed out of place for a father's friend to attend a graduation ceremony in his stead, even if they were childhood friends. "Are you still questioning my relationship with Jessica?" Scene asked, disappointment in his voice. "You can't be more supportive." "It's not about that," I replied firmly. "Regardless of what you say, I'm going to the ceremony tomorrow. Don't forget to iron my shirt." With that, Scene abruptly ended the conversation. Left with no other option, I reached out to Jessica. "Hello, Jessica. About tomorrow?" "Oh, tomorrow? Yeah. I'm borrowing Scene," Jessica interrupted. "Thanks, but won't Matt mind?" I asked, concerned. "What are you talking about, Sophie? I haven't even told Matt about the graduation." "I'll let him know after it's over," she said. I was stunned. Jessica hadn't informed Matt about any preschool events, and it seemed like Sean was being passed off as the father. "What are you thinking? This is incredibly disrespectful to Matt, just because you and Sean are childhood friends." "Hey, what's wrong? You sound kind of scary," Jessica said. "Well then, I'm counting on you for tomorrow," she added before abruptly hanging up. Fuming with anger, I still ended up ironing Scene's shirt, preparing his tie, and sending him off properly to Maya's graduation ceremony the next morning. After this incident, Jessica and Scene began spending more time together. What had been a monthly occurrence soon turned into weekly outings, and before long, they were meeting every 2 days. Matt seemed to notice something was off. One evening, when Scene and Jessica were out, Matt came to my house. "I'm sorry for dropping by so late, but something's been bothering me," he said. "Is it about those two?" I asked. "Yes," Matt replied, showing me GPS records he'd installed in Jessica's car. The records revealed that they had visited a lodging facility about 3 times a week, always on days when Scene was out with Jessica. The implication was clear from Matt's expression. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to take revenge on them," Matt said. "I can't forgive them for betraying us after all this time." I felt the same way. We secretly began planning our revenge against Scene and Jessica. My first step was to focus on increasing my income. After getting married, I had reduced my work to focus on household duties, which significantly lowered my income. Matt transitioned to working from home, and whenever Jessica and Scene were out, he would bring Maya to my house so we could take care of her together. Unaware of our arrangement, Jessica and Scene made it easy to gather evidence against them. Just as we were ready to execute our revenge plan, we were stunned to learn the truth about Mia. After much deliberation, Matt and I decided to postpone our revenge until Maya reached adulthood. We didn't want to hurt her while she was still young. However, 10 years later, I was struck by a serious illness. It wasn't unusual for me to be hospitalized for a year or two, and though I could work from the hospital, I had to significantly reduce my workload. I immediately informed Matt of my situation and discussed it with Scene. "I see. I'll come to visit you sometimes," Scene replied casually, showing no real concern for my condition. His indifferent attitude made it painfully clear that he no longer cared about me. It seemed true, as he visited only once or twice a month. As time passed and Maya turned 15, she had been visiting me almost every day since my hospitalization. However, after her 15th birthday, something felt off. I asked Matt if he knew anything, but he didn't seem to know either. When I inquired with Mia, she simply told me not to worry about it. We were left in suspense, but the truth was eventually revealed by Scene, who unexpectedly came to visit me in the hospital. "Hey, it's been a while," Scene said as he entered the room without knocking. It had indeed been a month since we last saw each other. During that time, Scene had changed significantly, becoming quite flashy. Jessica followed him in, showing no concern for my health. "I'm divorcing you," Scene announced. "You don't do housework or have a job, and there will be no division of property. Sophie, please take care of this," he said with a smirking smile, while Jessica clung to his arm. "All right, a divorce it is," I replied calmly. Scene was surprised by my readiness but quickly exchanged smiles with Jessica. Scene's straightforward nature played to my advantage, allowing my plan to proceed without any issues. After the divorce was finalized, I began my revenge plan. By the time it was complete, I hoped my illness would have improved, and their regretful faces would be my reward. I called Matt to inform him of my transfer to another hospital and that a lawyer would handle any dealings with Scene and Jessica. Matt moved closer to my new hospital and continued bringing Maya to visit me regularly. Despite Mia's sadness, her daily visits brought me immense joy. Meanwhile, I instructed Jan to dispose of the belongings I had left behind in my house. I had already moved all my personal belongings to the hospital room and wanted to ensure that nothing was touched by Scene or Jessica. After settling into my new hospital and Matt's relocation, I received a call from Scene. Despite only being away from my room for a few minutes, I found 30 missed calls on my smartphone. Annoyed, I answered when the phone rang again. "Yes, what is it?" I said. "Hey, what the heck is going on?" Scene's voice was agitated, and I could hear a confused real estate agent and Jessica yelling in the background. My mood darkened further. "What do you mean? What's going on?" I replied. "The house. Why are we being kicked out?" Scene demanded, raising his voice and clearly refusing to acknowledge any responsibility. I remained calm. Of course, after everything that's happened, it's only natural that the room I rented would be canceled. You seem to have forgotten that the space we lived in was rented by me for work. When I started working independently, I couldn't afford a separate workspace, so I rented a room that served both as a home and an office. Scene, whose income was insufficient to live alone, ended up living in that space. However, he never paid rent or utility bills for the room. While he did provide monthly living expenses, they were never enough to cover the costs of maintaining the space. It's unfortunate, but the room is no longer available. The hospital I transferred to was quite far from the house, and after the divorce was finalized, I had no intention of continuing any ties with the property. I proceeded with the cancellation process without contacting Scene, as the real estate agent who understood the situation had promised to handle it for me. It seemed that Matt and Maya had also suddenly disappeared, and their house might have been sold. What are we supposed to do now? Where will we live? Scene's frustration was evident. Well, you might have to stay in a business hotel for the time being, I suggested, starting to work on my smartphone with the speaker mode on. Scene, clearly irritated, demanded, "Don't be ridiculous. Pay me $2,000 a month as an apology for selling the house." I was taken aback by his unreasonable demand and stayed silent. Scene's voice grew louder. "Hey, don't just stay quiet." I coldly responded, "No way am I paying you any money." Scene looked momentarily stunned but quickly raised his voice again. My patience was wearing thin. "We're divorced and no longer have any ties. Don't contact me anymore. We'll communicate through our lawyers from now on. Wait for their contact." "What? A lawyer? Hey, wait, Scene tried to continue, but I cut off the call, no longer interested in his complaints. After ignoring several repeated calls, they eventually stopped. Scene, perhaps annoyed by my silence, began avoiding any contact from the lawyer as well. His childish behavior was frustrating, but I had expected it. Months later, after a temporary improvement in my health, I visited Scene's parents' home. Scene and Jessica were there, looking anxious. "You're being unfair talking to my parents like this," Scene said. "I just came to inform them of the divorce," I replied. Scene glared at me for a moment, but then shrank under his father's stern gaze. I had been close to Scene's parents. We often went out and had meals together even when Scene wasn't present. Given how well they treated me, I felt it was important to explain the situation. "Scene, I've heard everything from Sophie. Is it true that you're remarrying Jessica?" Scene's father asked. "Yes, Jessica, Mia, and I are starting a new family together," Scene replied. "What are you thinking? Your family is Sophie. She's not your family anymore," his father said, frowning. Scene shook his head, seemingly resigned, and handed me some documents. "These are the bills from a luxury hotel we stayed at." "What's this?" I asked, confused. "It's the bill for the hotel," Scene said, pointing at the documents as if it were obvious. But before I could respond, his mother slapped him, causing him to fall to the ground. She stood there, panting, her hands still raised. "What are you doing? I didn't raise you to behave like this," she said. Scene's furrowed brow indicated his shock at his mother's reaction. Jessica beside him wore a similar look of confusion. "Why are you so upset? Scene's family is just going through some changes. Plus, you're getting a grandchild related by blood. Aren't you happy about that?" "Related by blood? You can't be serious," I replied, staring at Jessica in disbelief. My in-laws had always treated me as their own daughter, even though they knew I didn't want children. They had also cherished Jessica as she was my son's childhood friend. I knew my mother-in-law would be deeply displeased with the situation, and Jessica should have understood that. "You've always loved Mia. Now she's going to be your granddaughter. You should be happy about that," Jessica said. "She's the child of someone I've known since she was little. Of course she's dear to me. But she's also Scene's child," I responded. Jessica showed no sign of remorse and seemed genuinely puzzled by her lack of understanding, which was unsettling. Then Mia, who had been silently fiddling with her smartphone in the corner, spoke up. "Stop it. It's disgusting," Maya said without looking up. "My father is only my dad. Whether or not we're related by blood doesn't matter. Scene attended all the events for you. I know all about them from Dad, who always said I was his daughter. I'm his daughter, not yours." Mia then sat next to me, on the verge of tears. "I was worried you'd hate me when you found out, but Dad assured me you wouldn't. That's why I came here." "I see, Mia. I loved having you visit me in the hospital every day," I said, embracing her. "I could never hate you. I love you very much, Mia." As I spoke, Mia, visibly relieved, hugged me tightly. Despite the fact that Maya was the child of Sean and Jessica's affair, she was the girl I had cared for over the past 15 years. It was impossible not to feel affection for her. Turning to Jessica, I asked, "Didn't you find it odd that I wasn't surprised to learn Mia is Sean's daughter?" Jessica gasped in surprise as another person entered the room. Matt. His sudden appearance clearly unsettled Jessica. She had been seeking a divorce from Matt recently, citing irreconcilable differences. "I was truly shocked when you proposed divorce. Let me remind you that we're still not divorced. You haven't filed for it," Matt said, addressing Jessica. Jessica had assumed Matt would handle all the divorce proceedings, which was typical of her tendency to leave everything to others. So Jessica is still my wife, and Maya is still my daughter. After the divorce, she won't be my wife anymore, but Maya will always be my daughter. Jessica turned to Mia, who frowned and clutched my hand tightly. I don't want to be her daughter anymore, Maya said firmly. Jessica was at a loss for words and glared at me angrily. Meanwhile, Sean began laughing loudly. I see, so you two are like that, but even so, you can't live on Matt's income alone. Don't misunderstand, I interjected calmly. Matt's income is actually twice what Jessica thinks it is. Sean scoffed. No way. You're joking. Plus, with your illness, it's impossible for you to work alone. It'll just be a miserable end. Sean's misunderstanding made me laugh, which only fueled his anger. Oh, you didn't know about my income? I asked. Sean replied dismissively. It's probably not much anyway. Actually, I make $900,000 a year, I stated. Sean's eyes widened, and he stood there, mouth agape in shock. Jessica was equally motionless. Over the past 10 years, I had gained recognition as a children's book author. I had published essays, been interviewed, and soon one of my works would be made into a movie. My income had skyrocketed. That's a lie. It's not possible, Jessica said. I showed Jessica my smartphone, displaying my bank account deposit records. The large monthly deposits left her speechless. Hey Sophie, let's try again, Sean said, but his desperation was palpable. I watched their reaction with a detached gaze. If you two are planning to remarry, feel free. It's your life, I said, ignoring Sean's protests. Holding Maya's hand, I greeted my in-laws and left their house. Later, I learned that Sean, who had been working at my father-in-law's company, was often out under the guise of business and eventually got fired. He tried to contact me several times, but I reported it to my father-in-law, which led him to stop reaching out. Jessica, after divorcing and losing custody, seemed to lose interest in Sean, who could no longer afford luxuries. She stopped pursuing him and was disowned by her family. With no full-time job prospects and a tendency to push responsibilities onto others, she struggled to find stable employment and was getting by on multiple part-time jobs. Since starting high school, Maya had been diligently studying every day with hopes of attending a prestigious university abroad in the future. Her serious personality led her to express a dream of translating my picture books and spreading them around the world. As for myself, the picture books I had illustrated were being adapted into an anime, and I was receiving proposals for merchandise. My health was steadily improving, though I remained hospitalized. My doctor mentioned that I might be able to be discharged next year. With hopeful anticipation for our future, I continued to write stories every day. The message on my smartphone took me by surprise. My lover is pregnant, so we're getting a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly. I stared at the screen, stunned. He'd been having an affair, and now this. The news of a pregnancy. I tried calling him repeatedly, but he never answered. All I could manage was a simple yes. A month later, after moving out and without saying anything further, I began receiving persistent calls from my ex-husband, whom I had not spoken to since. Despite having nothing left to discuss, I felt compelled to respond. When I finally did, he erupted into rage, screaming at me. Meanwhile, my life with my husband Mark and my mother-in-law had been surprisingly smooth. I had always thought mother-in-law issues were a fictional trope, but I came to appreciate just how wonderful mine was. I heard my coworkers complain about their in-laws and realized how fortunate I was. I made an effort to treat her with more respect and care. When my mother-in-law fell ill and was hospitalized, I started working from home to care for her. Initially, Mark was supposed to be the primary caregiver, but it fell to me. She would smile apologetically in the hospital, saying, "Thank you for everything. I'm sorry for being a burden. I wish she could be happy instead." I truly loved her. We'd shared close moments over tea, movies, and shopping. She often joked about my husband, saying he lacked compassion, though it was clear she said it with a hint of loneliness. "He just lies around when he comes home from work," she'd say. "I'll give him a lecture when I get out." Unfortunately, she never had the chance and passed away. After the funeral, I found myself alone at home, reminiscing about her. Her portrait showed her smiling peacefully, but her absence left a void in my heart. My husband hadn't returned home since the funeral, and he hadn't even visited his mother in her final days. There was nothing left to discuss with him. but I felt a deep sadness for my mother-in-law who had left this world without seeing her son one last time. Determined to confront Mark, I tried to locate him. He barely responded to emails and hung up when I called. It wasn't just about reminiscing. There were many unresolved issues between us that needed to be addressed. My voice echoed in the empty house as I waited for him to return. My phone vibrated with a new email notification. It was from Mark. I opened the email, half expecting the same message. My mistress is pregnant, so I want a divorce. Review the court papers and respond ASAP. Pack your things and leave quickly. I read the message in disbelief. Was this the same woman he was having an affair with? I can't believe it. She's pregnant. The message on my smartphone left me stunned. I repeatedly tried to reach Nick, but no matter how many times I called, he didn't answer. When the call connected, I only got a recorded message. After 20 years of marriage, was it really ending like this with just one email? As I listened to the dial tone, tears began to overflow. I couldn't hold back my sobs any longer and gave up on the call, throwing my smartphone aside in despair. This was happening too soon after my mother-in-law's death. I hadn't even had the chance to mourn her properly. I tried contacting Nick repeatedly after that, but he never responded. Not to my calls, not to my emails. It seemed our relationship was truly over. We never had any significant conversations about what was happening. I had simply replied yes to his email and left the house. A month has passed since the divorce was finalized. I've rented a room in a single-story house and am experiencing living alone for the first time in 20 years. I'm still working remotely, a necessity I took up to care for my mother-in-law, but now I find it suits me well. The convenience of working from anywhere with just a computer has been surprisingly fitting, and living alone again feels surprisingly comfortable. It's easy to take care of just myself. Caring for my mother-in-law wasn't a burden due to my affection for her, but waiting for Nick's uncertain return had been more stressful than I realized. I once believed Nick wouldn't have an affair. Friends had asked if I had doubts about him, but I laughed it off, thinking he wasn't the type. Now, I've painfully realized that people change. The Nick I was initially attracted to was diligent and loving, although not very successful in his job. Over time, he changed, but the shift was so gradual that I didn't notice it. I should have recognized it when he left all the responsibilities to me. The kind of Nick I once knew no longer exists. Reflecting on it now seems pointless. What I need is a break. As I stood up, trying to lift myself out of my gloomy thoughts, I decided to make some coffee and enjoy the cake I had bought yesterday. The perks of working from home, I mused. As I hurried back to my seat with a cup of coffee and a slice of cake, I savored each bite, feeling quite content, a sign that my mood had improved significantly. My feelings for Nick had completely cooled off. Just as I was pondering this, my smartphone vibrated. I glanced at the screen and saw Nick's name. I didn't want to let him ruin the uplifted mood I had finally achieved, so I chose not to answer. He had ignored my repeated calls before, so ignoring his call now felt like giving him a taste of his own medicine. An eye for an eye, I thought, justifying it to myself. Busy with work, I set my phone to silent mode and placed it a little out of reach. After enjoying my cake, I tried to focus on my tasks, but concentration eluded me. My phone kept vibrating incessantly. As soon as one call ended, another began, causing the phone to buzz repeatedly. Finally, I gave in and answered. "Hello," I began. "What do you think you're doing?" Nick interrupted loudly, cutting me off before I could greet him properly. "I'm about to be kicked out of the tower apartment. Explain this to me." I sighed. I've been wanting to talk to you about that, but he wouldn't answer my calls or reply to my emails. Blaming me is unfair. His yelling from the other end made me shake my head in exasperation. Was he always this difficult? If things continued like this, I might really have to leave. "What did you do?" he demanded. "I sold the apartment," I replied with a sigh. "Sold it." His voice, initially taken aback, seemed to calm down a bit. "Don't joke with me. That's my tower apartment. Just because we're exes doesn't mean you can do whatever you want." "Your wife is pregnant," I retorted. "Your wife?" "I admire your nerve to say that to me. You know I tried to contact you multiple times, right? Have you forgotten how you ignored all of that?" He probably thought I wasn't angry since I left him quietly, but who wouldn't be angry in such a situation? "I had tried calling and emailing you multiple times about something important. If only you had responded." "Well, I'm busy with work now, so I'll be hanging up. Goodbye." Ignoring his continued shouting, I ended the call. How self-centered could he be? My phone started vibrating again, flashing Nick's name on the screen. Unwilling to answer, I tossed the phone onto the bed and managed to get back to work. I understood why Nick was so anxious, though. Rumor had it that his mistress was a much younger and charming woman. Could such a girl really be attracted to an ordinary man? I had been viewing the situation cynically, assuming it was all about money. For the past few years, Nick hadn't contributed to our living expenses, so perhaps he was spending that money on his mistress. It made sense why he seemed affluent, living in a high-rise apartment. No wonder he appeared attractive to her, even though he wasn't particularly handsome. It turns out, right after moving in, he nearly got kicked out and no longer had the financial ease he once enjoyed. This must have been an unexpected blow for his mistress. Nick was desperate not to fall out of favor with his new wife. In reality, the apartment we lived in belonged to my mother-in-law. She bought it when we decided to move in with her after getting married. I was impressed by her bold decision. You're newlyweds, but if you're going to live with your mother-in-law, at least I want you to live somewhere nice and convenient, she had said. I was surprised when she actually bought that apartment. Since then, Nick had pretentiously referred to it as the Tower apartment. It always felt odd and even uncomfortable when he'd say, "I'm going back to my tower apartment." I remember struggling not to laugh out loud. So, hearing that he was kicked out of the tower apartment might seem funny from the outside, but it was serious for Nick. Meanwhile, my phone on the bed continued to vibrate incessantly. I wondered if Nick felt the same way when he kept receiving calls from me. The thought made me pause my typing. Was my behavior mirroring his? The idea annoyed me instantly. Why was I so irritated? Quickly, I stood up, grabbed the still vibrating phone, and answered the call. "Stop it. What do you want?" I demanded. "You sold my tower mansion," he accused. "Your tower mansion?" I retorted coldly. "That place belonged to your mother. Was it ever really yours? Now that she's gone, it's only natural for her daughter-in-law, who cared for her daily, to take over. I'm appalled that you didn't even bother to visit her in her final days and now claim to be the rightful heir. If you think she left her property to someone like you, that's a joke. That apartment was given to me by your mother. She preferred to leave it to someone who actually cared for her rather than a son who never bothered to visit." "That's not acceptable," Nick protested. "It is accepted. I don't need your permission. It was your mother's property, and she had every right to decide what to do with it. She clearly stated in her will that it should go to me." Talking to Nick was giving me a headache. Was this selfish man really the person I once loved? Why was I attracted to him in the first place? His irresponsible behavior over the past few years had deeply saddened his mother. He refused to contribute financially to the household, broke promises, and complained about my housework. She believed our relationship wouldn't last long because of how he acted. When I heard this from my mother-in-law, I assumed Nick and I would always be together. I reassured her, "Don't worry. Everything will be fine." I never imagined we'd break up so soon after that. She told me, "After you split up, you can either keep the place or sell it. Do whatever you think is best." It was even written in her will. "Stop lying. You must have made that up yourself," Nick shouted. I was frustrated with Nick's constant yelling and lack of consideration. I had tried to communicate properly, but he ignored my messages and simply sent an email asking for a divorce. So I decided to leave and sell the place. "You could have just emailed me about it," I said, tapping my itching temples. I sighed deeply. Did I really need to politely explain to a man who offloaded his parents' care to others and had an affair, via an email he might not even read, that he should reflect on his own actions? His attitude was unbearable. "You should really take a moment to reflect on your behavior," I said, trying to stay calm. "Maybe now you understand how your actions led to this. And one more thing." Before I could finish, Nick hung up, as usual, cutting me off. There was still important information I hadn't shared, but his selfishness always took over. Even though I said it was important, it wasn't really crucial to me, and I knew I shouldn't get too involved in his affairs. After all, Nick was a stranger to me now. The phone went silent, and I was finally able to focus on my work. About 6 months later, as I stood at my mother-in-law's grave, I reflected on selling the apartment. "I'm sorry for selling something you left me, but I'm truly grateful for what you did," I said softly. As I was leaving, I found myself wondering about my ex-husband and his new partner. They must have moved out after the sale of the apartment, but it wasn't my concern anymore. Feeling a bit lonely, I began my journey back home. On the way, I unexpectedly ran into a familiar face. As I suspected, he noticed me and approached, his steps heavy with anger. Behind him, a woman carried a baby. You made us move into a rundown flat. You got money from selling the luxury apartment. Give me some of it, he demanded. So, you're still married despite everything? I responded with a hint of sarcasm. It's not my fault you're living in a shabby flat. Given your income, it's only fitting you live somewhere like that. The high-rise apartment was an exception. I turned to his young wife. You really missed out. You were drawn to his wealth, but now he's just an ordinary man, I added, unable to hold back the harsh words. I couldn't help but feel cynical. If you hand over the money, everything will be solved. But it's pitiful for Naomi and the child, don't you think? Yes, I'm postpartum and not feeling my best, Naomi said, her voice tinged with sadness. It's just too disheartening to have to live in such a dreadful place, especially for this child. I understood her frustration, given the context. It made sense now, hearing her words from someone who might have an affair. Indeed, it must be a traumatic experience for the child to have you as a parent. If you want to improve your living conditions, I said, why not look for a part-time job? You need to live within your means. Their eyes widened in surprise, and they protested vehemently. They argued that a high-rise apartment lifestyle suited them, but I wasn't inclined to listen to all their excuses. From what I gathered, they seemed to overestimate their situation. Despite already living in a modest flat, they had such inflated self-esteem. How honorable can someone who has an affair really be? I asked, my voice unexpectedly cold and sharp. First of all, do you even realize that today is your mother's death anniversary? And yet, here you are, making demands. When I glared at him, he retorted, his voice trembling, but I can't help it. I don't know your address. Stop being so shameless, I snapped. This is pitiful. Even the worst person who had an affair might have been forgiven if they showed some compassion for the deceased. Taking a deep breath, I glanced at Naomi and the baby she was holding before turning back to Nick. There's something important we need to discuss, I said, ready to address the issues at hand. I hadn't had the chance to fully explain before Nick cut me off during our last call. There was something important about that baby I needed to address. There's a strong possibility it might not be his child. Nick's anger flared up again. Don't say such ridiculous things. You think you can just say whatever you want. His voice was heated, but he was clearly rattled. In contrast, Naomi's face had gone pale, showing unmistakable concern. It's clear to anyone that we couldn't have children, I continued. That's why I had it checked out. I wanted a child, so I saw a doctor, but they found no issues with me. I asked you multiple times to go to the hospital, but you never went. So what are you implying? That it's my fault because there's nothing wrong with me? Nick's mocking smile only deepened my frustration. Of course, there's more to the story. You had a high fever as a child, didn't you? Your mother told me that could have caused your infertility. What are you talking about? Nick demanded. The reason your mother gave me the apartment wasn't just gratitude for living there, I explained. There was a bigger reason. It was out of guilt. She felt it was her fault you couldn't have children. She apologized to me for not being able to give me grandchildren. It's not confirmed that your infertility is the cause, but maybe you should consider getting a DNA test done. Nick, who had been listening quietly, lost all his initial momentum. In a somber tone, he told Naomi, "Let's go," and started walking away. As I watched him leave, I remembered something crucial and called out, "Oh, and I'll be demanding alimony for the mental distress, just so you know." With those final words, it felt like the whole ordeal was coming to a close. Several months later, my busy schedule made me answer a call without checking the screen. "It's me. Are you doing well?" Nick's voice came through. Confused, I realized it was Nick calling. "What do you want?" "I'm busy." "Listen, that baby isn't mine." I had doubts about it myself. I realized this because of our conversation. I've divorced Naomi, so how about we start over? His attempt at reconciliation seemed utterly unrealistic. I chuckled lightly. Reconciling after an affair? That's unthinkable. I can tell you're probably struggling living alone and just want to rely on me. I might consider hiring you as my secretary. My affection for Nick had vanished completely, but he was still the only son of my mother-in-law. I thought I was being as generous as possible, but Nick wasn't pleased. "Are you mocking me? Being your secretary? This is your last chance for reconciliation." "I don't need such an opportunity," I replied. "Honestly, you should look at things more objectively. Before I could finish, the call was abruptly cut off. How childish to hang up just because he didn't like my response. Despite my good intentions, he seemed to underestimate them. He would probably continue living in a shabby flat, which was no longer my concern. After blocking all contact with Nick, I returned to my work. I had started a new business with the funds from selling the apartment, establishing a company to support my livelihood. My experience in caring for my mother-in-law and my natural business acumen paid off. The business grew rapidly, and I now had a team of staff members. It's all thanks to my kind mother-in-law. No matter how busy I get, I always make time to visit her grave on the monthly anniversary of her death to express my gratitude for the happy days she helped provide. Nick won't know, but I'll be back next month. With renewed enthusiasm, I focus on my work, determined to make the most of my new life.